politely.
Smiling politely is like the only way to handle going live on YouTube.
Right?
Yeah.
Trace, why don't you tell the people what we're doing?
Problem. The anomaly. We'll call it the anomaly.
The anomaly.
It's not. Yeah, go ahead.
We're going to start the movie at 6:17 Pacific, which is about 12 minutes from now or 11 minutes from now. Because if we started at that moment, when Tom Hanks utters the line in the movie, it will line up to 50 years ago to the second when Jim Lovell said the same line. Except it's a different line because they changed it for the movie. But we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we do a quick whip around of introductions? Mary Robinette, you're top of my screen, so why don't we start with you?
All right. My name's Mary Robinette KOWAL, and I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer, and specifically write stuff that is set in the Apollo era. You're muted. So we do get our bingo point. Everyone who's playing bingo, we did have the you're muted, and we also had the awkward silence. So you get to fill in both of those squares.
We should have done it. We should have done like a bingo card thing for this. Make it all audience participation on all sides. Me?
Yeah, Amy, you're up.
I'm just realizing that I sat down with a different book other than the book that I just wrote to talk about later. But I'm Amy SHIRA TEITEL. I'm a spaceflight historian. I feel like I can do this for the first time ever. Specializing in Apollo era history. Here are signed posters and photographs of all the Apollo astronauts I've met. And my new book, Fighting for Space, which I don't have a copy of because I sat down without it. Is out now, and that's me in a nutshell. Also, Pete Conrad is here.
Oh, is that the astronaut like reincarnated as a cat or just a cat?
I mean, I'd like to think he's got a little bit of Pete Conrad's joking nature in him in there.
Does he like colorful things as much as Pete Conrad did?
He likes colorful things. He does ascribe to the life philosophy of if you can't be good, be colorful, because he doesn't cat good. He does not cat good. He likes to hiss at his own tail and also walls. It's fun.
Yeah.
BOBAK, welcome in. Like you, it's almost like you've been preparing for this moment with all the.
I'm just really excited for this moment because this is like this movie and this story is one of the reasons why I work in space, and just I love just talking about how spacecraft can fail in the weird ways. So
I know we're going to get into it with everyone in a second. Oh, and hi, I'm Kishore. Do you remember watching this movie for the first time?
Yes.
Yeah, talk about it.
I mean, so we were living in Japan still at the time, and I always loved space stuff, but this was one of those movies where I was like, we have to go and pay at the time it was like $18 per ticket to see a movie. Even back in the 90s. So that was kind of the exciting thing for me. But I think it was several classmates and I who all went together to go see this movie. And even then I was like very emotional watching this. So it was a very exciting experience. And I it was one of the things where I think it's also one of those moments where the movie does such a good job of showing the other people, not just the astronauts. And I think that's a really big part because I think growing up, I always assumed that space was just like the 5 people who were in space and not the thousands of people who were doing other things. So that was kind of one of the ways in which I learned that there was much more to working in space exploration than just being an astronaut.
Hey, Trace, really quickly. Chat is showing on the other computer. like the Zoom chat, so you might want to go just hit hide for a second. That's amazing, Bobak. I will cry. I'm gonna ugly cry during this movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, is everyone in the same boat? Okay, good.
Sure.
Yeah, no, that's the
I will tell you,
appropriate-
I will start crying at the go no go poll during launch. Like that moment of the build, like the anticipation of the build up is it's so good. It makes me so happy every time. I'll start joy crying at that moment.
I screened this at the Alamo Drafthouse in San Francisco a couple years ago with my friend Jeff Silverman. We have like a regular science night there, a monthly science night, and we usually get up afterwards and we talk about the science in movies. And we screened this, and I got up there and I just started bawling on stage in front of like 300 people, and I was like, I don't know. This makes me believe in in our country, in people, in science, just doing amazing things. And I think this movie, almost above all movies that are out there, make me believe that because of everything that was put aside and the ways people banded together just to save 3 men's lives during like one of the most, like, I don't know, stressful moments you can ever imagine. And I guess, I don't know, right now it makes me believe that we can do amazing things.
I mean, this is a thing that happens, like, and you see it throughout history, that there are points in which we will all band together. And it's, I feel like, in addition to the fact that, we're watching Apollo 13 on the anniversary, that the fact that so many of us are in fact banding together right now by trying to be safer at home and taking all of these protective measures to protect people other than ourselves is it is again, it's a difficult time, but it is also an example of the same kind of human spirit that happens in Apollo 13.
For our live stream viewers, we're going to start watching this movie in 5 minutes at 6:17 Pacific, where most of us are located time zone wise, so that we can time a specific line from Tom Hanks to be on the 50th anniversary of when Jim Lovell said it. So be ready to start your movie in 5 minutes.
We're starting can you hear me now? I hope.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Hi, I'm Trace. This is my YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in. So, yeah, we're starting the movie at 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Hopefully that will work for everyone. It is just before the Universal Pictures logo, or globe, will appear on the screen. So hopefully that will work for you. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, but
Trace, do you remember seeing this movie for the first time?
I do. I think this came out in 1996, 95, 96. And so I was in high school and I was in the band. So I remember being really excited about the soundtrack because it's got a lot of really amazing like brass parts, and I played the trombone, and I was always jealous of the trumpets and cornets, but this has some really good cornet trumpet parts. So I'm really excited for that. I also I loved the idea that astronauts, as much as I think film and storytelling tends to make astronauts out to be even more amazing than they actually are in real life. Like they're very much a specific type of person. But this, I think, does a pretty good job of showing them as like a little bit flawed, which we hadn't really seen in a lot of narratives about astronauts. We'd always seen them as heroes, and that's it. And he was like, not the best with his marriage, and not the best with, there are like little bits that you can see where there's struggles. And I think that's nice. I liked that even when I was young. I was like, dang, these astronauts sure are problematic, but nice cars.
How about you, Amy? When did you see it for the first time?
So I saw it for the first time not long after it came out on video. And this movie is the reason I became a writer. I was already like a huge space person when I saw it. And I was already a huge Tom Hanks fan when I saw it, because Big is one of my favorite movies ever. So we were at my grandmother's house in Maine, and we were trying to rent a movie, and my dad was like, well, you like space stuff and you really like Big, so the guy from Big goes to the moon. I'm like, okay, that sounds fun. And I was just like, oh, okay, because like I already knew the names of the astronauts and all of that stuff. I just like with the kid learned that, and then I was like, oh, they're real people. And it was like this little light bulb went off on in my 10-year-old brain. So I immediately bought the book, and written by Jeff Kluger. And I don't have it. I have it's at my parents' house, but I have a copy of, it was originally titled Lost Moon. I have it signed by Jim Lovell, and I don't have it here. But I do have Jeff Kluger's more recent Apollo 8 that he signed to me. So I can show that off as my fun related, if I can find the page, my fun related space swag, which was awesome because I got to meet Jeff Kluger and tell him that his book was what made me realize I wanted to do storytelling in terms of science, not just straight science. And it was because of Apollo 13. So yeah. And now we're friends. And he's like the coolest person ever. Yeah. I still geek out when he like tweets at me and stuff. I'm like, yeah.
That's the best ending to that story. And now we're friends.
Yeah. So cool.
I'm going to jump in because we have to start the movie here in just a minute. So I'm wondering if, Trace, you can actually lock us into when we start. Is there a delay to YouTube? Do we have to account for that? Because we're going to be proper.
There shouldn't be a delay. I put it on ultra high latency, so we should be pretty close to real time. And we should start the movie in about 5 seconds. Yeah. Okay. So ready, everybody?
Mm-hmm. Ready. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off.
So is anyone else going to have to mute themselves because they're watching it not on the computer with headphones?
There might be some muting involved, yeah.
I'm just going to have to go ahead and mute myself because I'm watching this like on my proper TV because...
I'm watching it on my TV as well, but I think if you hold down spacebar, it unmutes you while you talk, like a walk.
Yeah. I have not heard it from you all.
Oh,
I'm not piping my sound through, loud. So.
I should also say that I listened to this soundtrack basically on loop while I was writing my book. But like the score, not the soundtrack.
So is the like I don't remember the soundtrack being everything.
Oh, it's so good.
Really? Oh, so good.
Oh, just watching the scene from Apollo 1, like to set this off is an amazing way to start. Oh, I don't know if I can handle watching this part.
It's a lot. This is a lot. Oh.
How did you think they handled this in subsequent movies, like the recent movie, First Man? Do you feel like it? I mean, this obviously didn't get much attention here in this movie. We just got that initial scene, but
yeah,
it was much more prevalent in First Man.
I mean,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I felt like they did a great job with it in First Man. I remember that viscerally. There are other things that I had more issues with, but
what do you think the likelihood that these astronauts were drinking Budweiser is?
Pretty high.
Pretty high?
High likelihood.
Yeah.
They do hang out in Texas. I mean, they could have been drinking Lone Star, maybe a little bit of, little, what is that? Shiner.
So he was the first, and I think the only one who was unmarried in the astronaut corps, which is part of why he was such a playboy.
I feel like they were all playboys, most of them.
Yeah, but he was the one that was available in different ways.
By 1970, Don Isley had already gone through his divorce, so it was becoming more of a thing that was known that the astronauts were A, having affairs, and B, leaving their wives for their mistresses. So He was the only
Yeah.
one that wasn't like, his job wasn't jeopardized for sleeping around.
Right.
Nathan in the chat says he's drinking Budweiser too, just like an astronaut. Nathan, nice job.
I didn't show this off. Did I show this off since we went live? I feel like I should. My Apollo 13
Apollo
glass, the safe return. Yeah.
Nice.
It's nothing fancy. It's just grapefruit juice. I just want to have some excuse to have this.
When did they make those glasses? Is that from like the 70s?
1972, I think.
Yeah.
I have a picture. It's Apollo's 11, 12, 13 on the picture. And then the glasses, I have Apollo 11, 12, 13, and 14. And then they just like stopped making them.
Since you shared that on the last time we were together, I have to tell you that I went and bought some of those for myself.
Nice.
They haven't arrived
eBay
yet.
or Etsy?
eBay.
eBay is the best.
I really want some, but I already have too much glassware.
Oh, you
That
can
did
never
not
have
stop
enough
me.
vintage glassware.
I can't watch Bill Paxton and it still doesn't like settle that he's gone. Like every time I see him on screen, like I did a
Totally.
rewatch of Harry Potter and I felt the same way about Alan Rickman. I'm like, no, this person's still around, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think he was so underrated as an actor. He was I think he's exceptional in this movie too.
Oh yeah, we're reminded by Russ in the chat that if you touch your face, we're playing a drinking game now. Whether you have alcohol or not, it doesn't matter. But you know, touch your face, take a drink.
I feel like I should throw in with the history bit. Pete Conrad was there, thanking everyone for Pete Conrad. Come here, come here, come here. So Pete Conrad is here too, but he won't come over. But he's there saying, thank you for coming to my dress rehearsal. He was actually in mission control at the time. There's a great picture of him just being like, it's awesome.
Do you think Tom Hanks and Jim Lovell are like similar people, or did he play him well?
I just watched the Apollo 13 documentary, the short one that NASA put out. And what was weird was watching it. I was like, you know, the person who looks more like him as an actor now is actually Kevin Costner. But he seemed very, from everything that I've heard and read about him and seen in interviews, he seems, I think he is the down-to-earth person that that Hanks plays him as. Although okay, can we just talk about this full moon for a second? Because this bothers me. They do such a good job, but it would not have been a full moon because they landed at dawn on the moon. Because in order to touch down, because there was no there's no shadows. I mean, there's no depth perception because of the lack of atmosphere. And so in order to have the best view of the landing site, they needed to set down at dawn so that they had very, very long shadows, which means that it would not have been a full moon because that is noon at their particular landing site.
Nice.
Can you talk about that for a second? Why don't you have depth perception if there's no atmosphere?
So atmosphere causes something, there's an aerial perspective, which is that the more layers of atmospheres that stack up, the hazier things get in the distance. So when you remove the atmosphere, you don't have that visual indicator. So everything is as clear as if it is right next to you because there's no atmosphere at all between you and it. There's no stacking. Between that and the fact that there aren't any trees, there's also no visual reference points. So like you can, we lived in Iceland for a little while and you do have atmosphere there, but there are no trees, there are no buildings in many of the places, and you can't tell how far away things are. Like there was a point when we were driving and saw this, this white thing in the distance and eventually realized that what we were seeing was a glacier coming up over the curve of the earth. And
you heard it here first. The Earth is curved.
Yes.
What?
Yes. So anyway, so that's why you have to land at dawn, and the reason they do dawn instead of dusk, because you also get long shadows at dusk, is that at dusk the moon's surface would have been heating for 2 weeks, and that would have been unpleasant for the astronauts to be out on regolith that was 250 degrees.
I love all these shots of the vehicle assembly building.
Yes.
They're very cool. It's such a cool building.
Has anyone been in the VAB?
Me.
I've been on the roof too. It's awesome.
Talk about it.
I'm
Talk
so
about
jealous.
I should turn this down because I'm getting distracted. I've been in there a few times. I actually shot a documentary for something that was on the Science Channel. I think it was Impossible Engineering. But before that, I was just had like a fan who was at NASA took me on a tour and took me not only in the VAB but up on the subroof. So I can't remember exactly why, but there's like this, I can barely stand up straight and I'm 5 foot tall. So there's this subroof on the VAB that like the last beam that was installed, everybody signed it. And like, I got to see that beam and no one can get at it because it's in the subroof. And they went onto the roof and it's just like this amazing view. And it's like weird to explain the size of that space. Yeah. It was very cool. I also got to go to the rubber room under the launch pad, which was very cool.
Oh,
that was one of the coolest things I think I've ever seen.
What's the rubber room for?
So the rubber room is, I should pull up my old blog post about this and share it because it's cool. I should probably revisit it actually. So if in the event that the Saturn V exploded, the crew needed a safe way to get away. And what they did was they calculated effectively what the blast of a Saturn V, a fully fueled Saturn V would look like, and figured that they wouldn't be able to get very far, but they could get down. So what they did was create this thing where the astronauts could go down really quickly to the base of the launch pad and then go through a slide that would take them from the base of the launch pad, from the mobile launch platform, into a room underneath the launch pad, through a massive door into what is effectively a bunker. And it's on springs so that if it explodes, your room doesn't shake. And it can hold 24 people for, I think, 2 days, with oxygen candles, blankets, a toilet in the corner, and emergency rations. And then there were 2 passageways out the side that were like a mile long that would let you out once the toxic gases and everything hit. I love that delivery from Tom Hanks, by the way. That's like one of my favorite. His, yeah, sure. Wait, no, it's like such a dad move.
Yeah.
It's my favorite.
Well, and
I love Tom Hanks.
Yeah. But what's also this is like the second time this has happened to him.
Yeah. Yeah, he talks a lot about how his going to the moon ruined a lot of vacations to Mexico.
Yeah. Amy, is this the rubber room?
Yes. This is
your post on it?
That's my old blog. Yeah, that was me. And when I'm sorry, but when Seeker took over D News or Discovery News, I lost all of my bylines. And I'm still really bummed out about it because that's me.
I think it actually says your name on
Does
this
it?
one at the top.
I tried to get them to redo as many
worth.
of them as I could, but a lot of them just say D News or Seeker Contributor, and I'm like, no, I actually went there.
So this is what you were talking about in the bottom?
The fire blankets. There's there's a
Nice.
chart. I have a picture somewhere. I don't know if it's in here or if I have it, but there's a chart of like when you would need to light a new oxygen candle based on how many people are there. So it's giving you like between 8, which would kind of be the minimum, to 20, which would be the maximum number of people who would be, Pete Conrad, knock it off. So I'm trying to like gently constrain the cat from going in the cabinets.
That is cool.
To figure out like with how many people, how long you could survive with what you had in there. It was such a, I didn't know it existed until they're like, you want to see this? And it's like, it's a heritage site and you can't go in. And I just like, they just sort of like just go real quick. Did one of those.
Wow.
That's
awesome. So awesome.
One of the coolest things. I should say the first time I saw the Saturn V out there in the Apollo Saturn Center at the Cape, I definitely unwittingly swore under my breath in front of some children, then cried, and then stared at it for 2 hours. And then at a banquet that night, an older gentleman sat next to me at this like, Astronaut Scholarship Foundation fancy event. And he's like, you're the young lady who was staring at the Saturn V for 2 hours. I was just amazed that your generation loves it. I'm like, yep. Yeah. If you have never been, go. Pete Conrad.
I'm eating truffle popcorn. That's not as cool as the rubber room, but it's pretty cool.
Now I want popcorn. Thanks for that. But I also don't want to walk away to make popcorn.
I made it on the stove in a pot. We don't really have any other way to make it. The simulator looks so cool.
Yeah.
Did they shoot out with the real simulator? Do we know? I would imagine not.
I believe it's all sets. But should we tell the story now of like how they actually shot this movie? Because that's also super cool.
So amazing.
Yeah. Do it.
They shot all of the space scenes. The reason why the 0G looks so good is because it's real. They actually shot it in the Vomit Comet. So once you know this, you can see it. Pete Conrad, knock it off. He's trying to get into cabinets. It drives me nuts. You get to about 20 seconds of weightlessness to shoot something. So all of the scenes that are weightless is actual weightlessness. They took these tiny sets up and actually did it that way. Otherwise, they had guys on levers, like moving the chairs ever so slightly to give them the like look that they were floating. Yeah. But if you know that and you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, all of the scenes, all of the shots are very short. And it's because they had such a short time to actually get it. And,
612.
Yeah. Insane.
612 parabolas.
Yeah.
There's even a couple shots where they shot it on the parabola, like on the Vomit Comet, that they didn't need to because like the actual vehicle is in thrust. So it actually wouldn't be going through that sort of like weightless phase. But for the most part, it looks incredible. And I think we'll see that in, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes coming up.
This is one of my favorite lines coming up. There's like another dig at Pete Conrad. That's my favorite.
Which is amazing, isn't it? 4 days to the moon.
Pete Conrad, come
Landing on the moon.
For the record though, Pete Conrad made an excellent landing on the moon because it was very exactly precise so that he'd go over and pick up a couple of pieces of hardware from Surveyor 3.
Yeah.
Pete Conrad, come here.
BOBAK, did you have like a model of curiosity that you did that with where you would just like land it on a table and be like, this is how it works?
I do now. I didn't have it before the landing, but now we have like a Lego made, which is great. And I have a very tiny one up on my bookshelf. And the Hot Wheels, which is the best size.
Flavia just texted me. She's watching the stream and says we're doing a great job. Oh. But she said, are we going to talk about the astronaut that gets sick? And I was like,
yes, we are.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it.
Oh, we're going to talk about urinary. We're going to talk about urinary tract infections. We're going to no.
Measles.
We're going to talk about space turds.
Yeah, when earlier when the person asked him, you know, how do you pee in space? And I was like, this is apparently one of the top questions that astronauts get. But I was also like, pay attention. That's going to be important later.
So I've actually watched this movie with the commentary, and one of the only like problems Jim Lovell had with this scene, he's like, I never had a red Corvette. I think it was black.
Yeah, I was gonna say the color is wrong.
The only thing he's like, they got the color wrong. I'm like, of all the things that can be wrong about this like epic movie. So I actually have a great little story about this. I know Jerry Griffin, who was one of the flight directors on Apollo. And he was a technical advisor on this, as well as the delightful romp into nothingness, Apollo 18. And he was telling me that he met with Ron Howard. It was him, Ron Howard, Tom Hanks, and I think John Young was another one of the astronauts who was one of the technical consultants on this. They met in the original Mission Control in Houston and had a chat, and they told the story, and he's like, you know, we just did our job, we knew what to do, and we got it done. And Jerry's like, told me, he walked out of that meeting, he's like, I don't think there's a movie there, guys. I don't think you could possibly make this an exciting story. And Jerry was telling me that everything is like, it's pretty technically accurate for taking, you know, this much time into this much time. But the one thing they had to do to create a sense of urgency, because he's like, we weren't that frazzled, we were very calm, was to have all the people walking really fast in the background. So all of that like sense of urgency from the background players is what they had to put in, because according to the guys who actually did it, it was too calm.
I think later on we'll play the actual mission audio of certain bits, and so people can actually hear the difference.
Yeah.
You know what's funny about what you talked about, Amy, is that when Ron Howard made the movie and he was showing it to focus groups, there was this feedback he would keep getting that the ending was unbelievable to this movie, that they didn't think like this would happen in reality. There was all this pushback from focus groups, and I think it just tells you that like there's something to this story that is so iconic and unbelievable. That,
yeah. Well, I heard this from a woman, actually, this lovely Airbnb host that I used to stay with in San Francisco, who I like ended up becoming friends with. She was back in 1970. Her dad was in the military, and she was stationed, I forget where, but she was somewhere where News from America was relatively protected to like keep morale up of soldiers. And they knew Apollo 13 went to the moon, and they knew it came back. She had no idea any of this happened until she saw the movie, and she's like, this is a weird story. And then she looked up, she's like, wait, that's what happened, and called her mom, was like, did you know? They just like didn't tell them. Whatever base they were on, they hid it because they didn't want to like freak people out who were serving overseas.
Whoa,
weird.
So weird.
I guess they would probably have Voice of America, right? That
channel. I don't know
Voice
what
of
it
America
would
just
have
didn't
been.
talk about it.
Yeah, they didn't want to make bad news bears, so they just I love this
the
shot.
crawler.
The crawler. I have a stone from that walkway in my room.
So I have to say that one of the things that goes through my head when I'm watching this scene is how hot they must be.
Yeah.
Because I just got to try on Adam Savage's replica of Apollo's suit, and even as a replica, without the liquid cooling and ventilation garment underneath it, heat up real darn fast. And so like with all of the photography lights on it, I'm like, oh, these folks are miserable.
Yeah, those photography lights are way too hot.
I'm also slightly behind you all, aren't I?
A little bit. You're like a scene behind us now.
How did that happen?
We are...
You're with the crawler,
2035 on the stream right now, which means in reality we're about 2040.
So do they still do that with astronauts where they make them get in uniform for press conferences? Like, I know they did this during the Apollo time where you're like, put on your suit, you're going to talk to press. Like there's something about that. Yeah, there's still a photo op now where they actually do interviews though. I thought it was just a photo op with like, whatever.
I sort of assume they just invite media to those things because like get everything out of it that you can, but Mary Ronette might know more details because
so
I know
being in the
ultimately I don't know modern as well.
Yeah, they still put them in the flight suit. I think for the official photo where they're in, most of the time it's in the EMU now, so they don't, I think, have the press there for that. One of the places that you do see people kind of unexpectedly is at the NBL, because if you want to see an astronaut in the full-on spacesuit now, it's when they're getting into the in and out of the NBL.
It's a good yell. It's a good one. Nice job, Kevin Bacon. Good act.
I always love the contrast of those two shots too.
I do too. He's just like so upset. Poor Gary.
I think he's about to get footloose right there too.
He's about.
So I was at a dinner one time with a friend, and Kevin Bacon and Kara Sedgwick sat down at the table next to us. And I was not going to interrupt their dinner, but I wrote a note out just telling him that like this movie was one of the reasons why I worked at JPL. And I left my email there. He never reached out to me, but I was like, at least I told him like, here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.
That's nice.
Have a nice dinner. I can only imagine a lot of people have said that though.
But I don't know how many flight engineers from NASA have said that to him.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say like,
I think
hey, look
that's
at
fair.
me, I'm a flight engineer. I was just
No, but I
like,
mean, like,
just
there's something to the
FYI.
conclusion of that story that also works. Like, you work at NASA now, and like, you know, there's a bit of that that's cool.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, in real life, do you think that the astronauts sat down and told him, or do you think an administrator told him? Because I would imagine the astronauts maybe were there, but it probably wasn't just the three of them shooting the shit by the simulator.
At one point, I did know the answer to this, but I don't remember anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like it was Jim Lovell who did, just because he was the one in command. But it was, I mean, Deke Slayton would probably have been there. Yeah, it would have been in a meeting room, not in like a hangar space.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while since I read Apollo 13, unfortunately. I have read the entire mission transcript though, so that's the thing.
You know, a subtle takeaway from this movie is how important vaccinations are.
Yeah.
I think we don't talk about that enough. This is like the original, like, get your shot. Vaccine development is critical. Like, if you want to, you know, be remembered as one of the most important humans in American history, you know, one of those things.
Yeah.
That's right. TJ's in the chat. What up, TJ?
Nathan
TJ's got a great
asks,
channel called I Need More Space.
Oh, awesome. Shout out to TJ then. Nathan asks, worm or meatball?
Good question.
Why not both?
I'm team worm. So
I'm team worm.
I am team meatball.
Definitely team meatball. Also team in like original insignia that's never used anymore.
What does the original insignia look like?
It's like, I'd have to look it up.
I have a t-shirt
have
with
an
it.
official insignia.
The worm feels like it's good for the digital era. Like, it scales to all sizes well. When you shrink it, it still looks really great. It's immediately
It was designed to do that.
Yeah,
No.
I mean,
I'm on
Are you talking about?
I don't know how to share my screen or do the fancy things, but it's the one that actually says National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It's got the same chevron thing, but it's around an actual planet.
I'll share my screen. You can see. I will save this.
I'm on team both because the meatball is nostalgic for me, because that's the NASA of my youth. But I think the worm is more aesthetically pleasing. Like on the side of a rocket, that worm logo can't be beat.
So it's also on the side of NASA headquarters in DC, and they spent like a bunch of money getting it put into the marble to put the stone up, and like right after it was done, they went back to the meatball. Yeah,
of course.
They also spent a lot of money to get it like professionally designed.
That one, I like that one. It's classic.
Oh yeah, no, that's good.
Looks very like old sci-fi.
I love that shot.
That is so close. Like to the launch pad, I mean.
Yeah, this isn't as close as you can get now I mean,
maybe the
like
even
in
the launch,
but yeah, but the night before launch, if it's already tanked, they're not going to let you that close. But I know with the shuttle, they don't tank if they're not going to launch until, like, if they don't know, they don't tank until early in the morning. They're going to launch in the morning. But I'm not sure with the Saturn V. When did they fill those tanks? Did they do that as late as possible in the process, is my assumption, for safety reasons?
Also because the liquid oxygen would boil off, so they had to do it late.
Yeah.
Let me look it up. BOBAK would know from like modern stuff. I
don't remember when we fueled. It was definitely day of, I think, on the Atlas, but I don't remember how many hours beforehand.
Sorry, this is one of my favorite things from the era.
Seems applicable now.
Yeah, another
we
carton
still
of space
have these
eggs.
labels. I mean, we don't have the eggs, but we still have the critical space item labels on things. And cool. Now they have little stickers with little glass vials on them that break at various G loads, so that if you are shipping it you can tell how high it got up in the G load. Right? Like, so they had one that breaks at like 2 Gs and then like 5 Gs and 10 Gs of like shaking. And so you can be like, oh, it never saw more than 5 Gs, right? The first one broke, but not the last 2 or whatever. So it's a clever little like trick to constantly track the hardware safety.
That is cool.
For the longest time, I thought they were rubbing sandpaper on his chest to take off his hair there. And I think that's wrong. I think that's just an alcohol wipe. But I thought that for like 15 years. And I was like, that's just cruel.
Well, after the Apollo 1 fire, they tried to get the astronauts to remove all of their body hair, like all of it, for safety. And they were like, no. Also, people, whenever I watch this movie, people are like, this is a dumb movie moment to have her wedding ring go down the drain. That actually happened. She actually had to call the front desk manager at this little inn to open the drain to get her ring out. And she talks about she was never superstitious. And then this happened. And then she just started panicking. She'd worn that ring. I forget how long they've been married at this point. And they're still married, by the way. Like, the Apollo 8 crew is still with their original wives, and they're very proud of that. But yeah, she talks about how it's like they'd been forever. She'd worn that thing doing dishes, showering, everything. And then that day, it fell off and went down a drain.
Have any of you been to a shuttle launch?
Yes.
I have.
STS
I went to the last one.
135.
BOBAK and I went to the last one.
Yeah.
Together, but not together.
What's it like when you're there in person? Is there like a anticipation feeling that we're kind of getting in these scenes when they're getting ready, even from the crowd?
Oh, yeah.
I had driven 3 days to get there and was camping behind an old folks home across the lagoon from the shuttle launch, because there was more than 1 million people in the Space Coast for the last shuttle launch. There were no hotels for like 50 miles. It was crazy. And everyone was like awake until 3 in the morning. And then they were going to launch really early. So people slept for a few hours, but everybody was charged. Like, the whole place, everyone was excited. Even though we slept for like 3 or 4 hours, when we woke up again at like 7 in the morning, there was not empty space. It was like a concert. Everyone was there. Everyone was waiting. Everybody was anticipating. And of course, there's the radio station that they're broadcasting the NASA kind of chatter on. So everybody's listening to that, and there are little portable radios everywhere and binoculars, and it is very much like this.
There's no James Horner score to really build it. But can we also talk about how amazing those camera tracking systems are for tracking? Like, they're zooming in like 400x.
The blue jacket in front in that shot is Marilyn Lovell.
Oh, no kidding. That's awesome.
Yeah, she and Jim Lovell are both in this movie.
That's
cool.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Jim doesn't come up till the end.
He's right at the end. I mean, spoiler alert, when Tom Hanks shakes the hand of the commander on the recovery carrier, that's Jim Lovell.
I'm going to cry at that moment.
Yeah, I love that.
So the one time I saw a launch was sort of by accident. I think it was 126. And this is slight overshare, but we were going to see my mother-in-law who was sick, and we were flying into Florida, and the shuttle launched while we were on our descent into the airport. So from a plane window, we saw the shuttle launch kind of arcing into space. And it was like the most unforgettable scene in my life, like watching that arc into space.
Yeah, I got to go see it at the I was with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, and we had our annual Nebula conference, and it's the only time that I have shared a hotel with another conference where I couldn't tell who was us and who was someone else, because it was filled with rocket scientists, and they were like, wait, is this like the Nebula conference? I'm like, this actually is the Nebula conference.
Here we go. Here comes the vest.
I love this casting. I think he does such a good job. And he even sort of looks like.
Can we talk about how the interns at JSC get to watch the movie in the control room and their summer internships?
Really?
I got to sit in the flight controller's desk in there once and almost cried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So exciting.
I know I'm touching my face and I don't care. This is amazing.
No, I don't think that crying counts.
I've been home
really
for a long
close
time.
shots.
My hands are definitely clean. They like bite my nails. Also, he would never have been able to go alone in a car that close to a launch. We're just this is the artistic license here.
Even if it's a gold Camaro.
I really want to believe he had a gold Camaro though, because that's just so.
I
awesome.
meant Corvette. I'm sorry.
I think they did. I think they had a deal with a local dealership that they could lease the car for $1 a year.
That's right. Yeah, I've definitely read that.
Yeah.
Because they just
all
wanted
had
to be
Corvettes.
associated with the astronauts, but they couldn't legally take something for free. They had to pay for it.
Has anyone met Gene Kranz? Yeah, is he kind of like that? Like the way Ed Paris plays him?
I met him at a cocktail party 5 years ago. It was actually at the Apollo 13 45th anniversary event at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. So like 45 years after this, plus cocktails, who knows? He did tell me, I feel like I should wait until after the launch sequence to tell the story.
Yeah, wait.
I love you all, but shush.
Oh, that view.
I love I love that so much.
Oh, so good.
I know we're being quiet, but there's just so much science to unpack in that launch.
Yeah, we're gonna get to it in a second.
Falling off the ship, like it's
Oh. Okay, so we're okay. We're okay. Nothing else is going to go wrong. We're fine.
We're good. That's great. This is going to be one of those moon landing episodes.
So I actually set the launch versus the real launch with a countdown against each other. So I'll show you what it looks like.
Yes, please. I'm so curious about that.
All right, can you see?
Yeah.
Oh,
Father, I just accidentally paused the film. Now I'm out of sequence again.
So you can
predicted cutoff is 12.
I have the actual audio from the launch playing, and so launches actually go at 0, but in the movie, they like at 0 they were still like separating like the pylons and all of that stuff, and so it's hilarious when you put them on the same timeline. Like the real rocket is like up in the air and like breaking the upper atmosphere, and they're still kind of on the ground in the movie.
Yeah,
like you're just still like watching it, like the video from the launch in the air has already stopped and they're still on the ground. It's just like a funny quirk, but I'll give it to Ron Howard on that one.
Yeah, I feel like that's fair.
I really like just something that I remember learning at space camp that just blew my mind, was that the tower is holding everything up. Like you don't really think about that.
Yeah,
I think most people assume that they roll it all out there and it just sits on everything, like a building. It just sits on the ground, and it's like no, it's hanging out so that there's space underneath it for all of the thrust to evacuate. I mean, it's pretty amazing that structure is holding everything, and then when the tower disconnects from this, it's because it's moving. It needs to go up now, like it's no longer needs to be held. And I think that kind of those little details are incredible.
If you watch a Saturn V launch versus a shuttle launch, you see how slow it is. Like it takes a while to build up the thrust to actually, and I'm sorry, I muted you guys while we watched. I don't know if you mentioned this already, but like it takes a while. Like I've watched so many Saturn V launches, like I've watched that footage so much that the first time I watched a shuttle launch, I was like, oh, it's like a cork. It just like boom. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, so I think smaller rockets in general also take off noticeably. Like the Minotaur things like leap off the pad. Saturn V was carrying a ton of fuel. I mean, so it's just moving a lot of mass.
It smells so bad. Oh my god.
Yeah, I guess when you're in a confined space, that is going to reek in a way.
Well, so that's something that like happens to most of them all the time. The modern astronauts, most of them fast before going up, or eat very, very lightly, because like for the first 3 days, your stomach is going to be unsettled. The Russians will apparently haze some of the new astronauts by saying, "You look good. Here, have more to eat," because they know that it's a terrible idea.
That's nice.
I mean, they're Russian, so.
Yeah. When I flew in an F-18, I definitely threw up all over the place, but I had a little bag that helped a lot.
Yeah, I would like there's a number of things that I really want to do, and going up, like I'm like I am willing to vomit to experience weightlessness.
Has anyone been on the vomit comet?
Not yet. It's on my list.
It's not on my list. I'm good. I believe that weightlessness is a thing.
I really want to go.
Yeah.
Well,
it's only $5,000, Trace.
Yeah, it's really
I wanted to go.
It's doable.
I wanted to go when I worked for a company that was going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tracy's got a wedding to pay for. I mean, it's
yeah, I don't have it. Although, little foreshadowing, we can talk about it again on Friday with our guest for SciComm Happy Hour.
No, I think if you at your wedding, you're like, so the choice was either like an open bar at this wedding, or I got to go on the vomit comet. People would totally understand.
Just be like, here's a video of me on the vomit comet, and please buy your drinks at the bar. Thank you.
Yeah, I would support that. Just FYI.
Great beat.
Okay, the actual docking was not nearly that sketchy. It was sketchy on Apollo 14. They actually had to slam into it really hard to force a hard dock. It was not that dramatic on Apollo 13.
What does an undramatic docking look like, though?
Like, you're just lined up, you just go, and then it just does what it's designed to do. Exactly like the simulators, almost like these experts trained for it, you know?
Kishore, were you not paying attention at the beginning? You take a beer bottle and a glass and you slide
and
one
it's
into
the probe.
other, and when everything's clicking.
I will find this and retweet it, but there's a thing that Anne McLean recently retweeted of someone with their poodle, and they hold their hand like this, and the poodle runs up and puts the nose into the person's hand, and like repeatedly, and they say it's like docking to the ISS, and she says, yeah, pretty much that's exactly right. You'll have to take my word for it that it's adorable, and I will.
The smoking emission control was also a thing, obviously, at the era at JPL. And I guess when they finally remodeled our like mission control, the panels, like they turned the lights and the panels on
so he's peeing.
ceiling are so yellow.
So did everyone see the peeing happen? And the urine dump? Okay. So the thing about the peeing in space, and this is why I'm like, this is actually relevant, is the way this works is they hook up to this thing, and they've got sheaths that they hook up to, and you have to move the valve at exactly the right time because it's a vacuum valve. And if your timing is a little bit off, it pinches anything that is within that sheath. So vacuum of space reaching through and pinching manhood. So you needed to get the timing exactly right. If you closed it too fast or too slow, you've got the pinching, or you've got urine in the compartment with you, which is great.
Backwash.
The other thing about it is that the whole flushing mechanism thing, when we get to the later part of the thing of the movie, and they are trapped in a spacecraft that is getting colder and colder and colder, they had to shift the way they were dumping the urine because it was causing problems and it was freezing lines. And that becomes relevant later. Ask me more about space pee.
My favorite Apollo pee story is on Apollo. I wish Pete was sitting next to me right now, but Pete Conrad had this thing where every time he had to pee, he'd be like, hey, Al, look out the window. Do a star sighting right now. Al, hey, go. And then he'd release his urine and be like, you sighted my pee. Grown-ups went to the moon.
Really small grown-ups, but grown-ups.
Yeah. It was 5'6.5", damn it.
Not small.
One of the other things that apparently happened is that as they were during some of the early tests, as they were orbiting, they were, trying to do all of these different complicated things to get a sense of what space was like and what it was composed of. And they were coming up with surprising amounts of like ammonia, and then finally realized what was happening was that they kept flying through their own pee.
Here's what the video from Jim Lovell looked like that day. So not quite as good as the Tom Hanks one, but basically the same frame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
That's nice.
They do. This is a real story.
Yeah.
And they joke, actually, they use the word quarantine, I think, at one point during this, like entering a different type of quarantine on re-entry.
Yeah.
Because he didn't file his taxes.
That's funny.
But there is a thing that if you're out of the country, you get an extension. So he was fine.
You know, going back to the smoking thing, you know, I'm okay with it. Like, I'm against smoking in public places, like across the board. But if you're in mission control and you're like controlling like the livelihood of people, you know, thousands upon thousands of miles away in space, I'm fine you having a cigarette. It's cool.
I don't want it.
No, I'm like,
I'll stick with peanuts.
Do we have like, I know we have lists from the shuttle era, but do we have any lists of what music was played in this era on these missions? Like they're making out the tape player to be quite the character here, and
yeah.
Part of, you know, and I know that that all of astronauts have brought humanity with them in forms of music and literature, and at one point a sandwich was wrapped nicely. But also, like, they used to wake the astronauts up with music, and I wonder if there are. I'm sure there's Spotify playlists out there filled with shuttle music.
The wake up music is in the mission transcript, so that anything that they played up from the ground is definitely in there. I haven't seen a complete list of it though. Anywhere. Someone has probably done it, and I just don't know about it. But all of that stuff is definitely in a record. What they played on board might not be in its entirety.
If anyone is just joining us on YouTube, there's a time code playing. That's the time code that we're at in the Apollo 13 movie, if you want to watch along. There is a really specific reason we started the movie when we did, which we'll get to in the not too distant future. Did the Apollo 11 documentary that came out last year, which was my favorite movie of last year, it was so wonderful hearing the track that Buzz was playing as they were heading back to Earth. And I think something about like hearing it through the kind of audio stream that was being fed back to Earth kind of made it extra special for me. So I love that they restored that track.
Here we go.
It's amazing that they use the worst like alarm noise for human beings to wake up to also alert like something bad is happening on a spaceship.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we have a problem. We have a main bus being underbowled.
We did it.
Yay.
So we started at 6:17 Pacific time. And so he just uttered the words, Houston, we have a problem in the movie. And Jim Lovell actually said that line-ish in space at that moment 50 years ago. Wow.
Now he said, Jim Lovell said, we've had a problem.
Right.
We have a problem.
He went with the past perfect. I get you. Or whatever.
Yeah, he writes about and talks about, he didn't think that it was anything. He thought it was a minor thing. They would sort it and it would be done. So the problem had been passed, was now done. No one expected anything like this could even happen or had just happened.
Yeah.
I love Clint Howard.
Do you want to hear the actual audio from flight at that moment?
It's weird how, yes, but it's funny how calm it sounds when you don't have a very dramatic score underneath it.
Yeah.
Let's get that hat.
Okay, I'm about to play it. It's about 10 seconds before.
We got a pretty large bang here associated with the master alarm. It's main bus A.
You can kind of hear them much more calm.
We have a main bus A under.
I don't know what it was. Okay. CNC, you want to look at it?
Yes, Houston, we've had a problem.
Roger, we're copying it, Capcom. You see a
We've had a
hardware.
main B bus undervolt.
You see an
Roger,
AC
main
bus
B
undervolt
undervolt.
there, guide? Or ecom? Negative flight.
Wow.
You can still tell that they are like, that's still like animated for astronauts.
Yeah.
So you could tell like something is really wrong, but it's not nearly what we see in the movie.
No.
Yeah, they do. I mean, they do call out that it's associated with the bang like they're like, oh, it came around the same time as the bang on the spacecraft or whatever, as well as you listen to the audio. But they're very calm. Also, half the time, I mean, on these, I imagine, especially in this era, a lot of things came down to telemetry issues, not actually spacecraft issues, right? You had sensor failures, all sorts of other things that were not always indicative of a real error.
Well, that's, I think, why this bit is so important in the film, where he's like, we're venting a thing. Like, this is a physical thing that's happening to us. This isn't like some failure of a sensor.
Like,
no
we can make the comparison between this and Apollo 12's launch, because that's a really great example of telemetry on the ground. The telemetry on the ground was designed to replicate what the astronauts were seeing in space, so everyone had the same stuff. In Apollo 12, the spacecraft, the Saturn V, effectively acted like a lightning rod, and it was struck by lightning twice, 36 seconds after launch, and it wiped out all the data. But it wiped it out in a pattern that told the flight controllers, John Aaron specifically, the ECOM at the time, that it was a technical problem, they hadn't actually lost anything on the spacecraft. But the way they describe, because I've read reports on this, the way they described everything turning to gibberish, like it wasn't gibberish. It wasn't like there was a translation problem of the data. It was like, this is just an unfathomable event that happened. And it was like, yeah, this is not telemetry. We're seeing the same thing in both places. So it can't just be a translation problem. Because that had happened a fair number of times.
I will say though that from like a operations perspective, if you see this many telemetry items fail, like telemetry in the LUSA sensors fail, right? You don't typically think it's something that took out a chunk of my spacecraft. I would typically think, oh, it's a compute error that's giving me a bunch of other errors that look like, you know, some weird thing, like, right? Because like, again, as Amy's saying, you can't fathom, I think, something like this is the root cause of that anomaly.
Drama. From like a filmmaking perspective, there are so many shots in this movie that I really love, because they emphasize the technology of the time, you know, like this shot where you're looking at the side of his face and he has this like wired thing on him, and then there's the avocado lamps, and there's the like the glasses he's wearing. Like, they did a really good job when they made this of making you feel like you're in this period, which I really love when films look at them with that kind of detail. I think that makes it much easier to let go of your disbelief.
I'll also say that my experience has been that we tend to not want to act very quickly in these anomalies. Like, unless you really think it's a catastrophic emergency, like you have to respond to quickly.
Yeah, I would imagine like quick action is kind of the antithesis of what you want.
That's right. You're very much about like, can you understand the root cause of this thing? Can you not change any configurations in order to learn from the error?
Yeah, the astronauts that I've talked to also say that their training is that to fight their instinct to do a thing, that they have to wait and understand the problem, but that taking the wrong action is often more damaging. So waiting to understand it. So the first step is for comprehension.
These moments must have been agonizing for control, to just sit there and wait for telemetry to come back. Is that what Jim Lovell said? Like, we've just lost the moon? Is that real? No.
When you read the transcript of the there's no like there's not the same level, there's no like movie level of self-awareness. Like it's very clear they go right into survival mode and have this reaction of like, we're doing this, we understand. Like if you're asking us to do this, I forget exactly how this works, BOBAK, you might know the technical details, but like closing the valve to shut off the oxygen tanks means they I forget why that is the reason why they shut that. They couldn't then go to the moon, but he never had that moment of like, aw, sad face. It was more like, if you're asking us to do this, this is serious, and we continue on with emergency procedures now.
Yeah, I don't know the technical reason besides there was a reaction.
I know I wrote about it once and I just can't remember the technical details. It was one of those things where like I looked it up and I did this a lot and I got it and I ran it by a couple people and they're like, that's correct. I'm like, did it once and I never have to go through it again. So it has to do with the way the fuel cells worked, and I'm not.
Yeah, I think you need a continuous reaction in a fuel cell. I don't know how you start the reaction in a fuel cell necessarily, but I think it's not trivial if you shut down if you stop the reaction. I don't think you have the opportunity to restart it.
Because I think part of it is if you have only one active fuel cell, you can't land on the moon because that takes away your backup. Because if for any reason the lunar module couldn't make it, there was a procedure where the command module would actually come down closer to the moon and pick them up. Like it was able to maneuver a fair bit, even though that wasn't ideal. Without that, I think they couldn't. So I'm going to find this old blog post I wrote because I explained it.
How much time? Can you give me a number? Well, we're looking at less than 15 minutes of last time. You got 15 minutes spread over worse than I thought.
What do you do with that kind of information if you're on a ship and they tell you you have X number of minutes left? It's out of Star Trek.
Yeah, but this is also like, this is actually a thing that they train for. Not this obviously, but you have this much time to respond or there's a failure. Because the thing that they did in training was, that they're constantly running simulations in which the crew dies, like simulation after simulation in which the crew dies. So this is, you have X amount of time. It is not like that. That's something that they were prepared for. There's a giant hole in your spacecraft, less so.
Yeah, I mean, they did this to us at space camp. Like they did kill us in our space camp simulation. So I can tell you that's definitely happened. I feel like a lot of this you triage. Luckily I've never had to do this in a spacecraft real-time anomaly, but we've definitely gone through and cut lines of the procedure in real time in order to like expedite a process and do things like that, right? Like know which steps are critical, which ones aren't. So there's experiences like this. We don't have nearly the anomaly training that they do. Like in a human ops mission like this, right? We go through 2 or 3 dress rehearsals with anomalies. And then for the most part, right, we write down procedures for this loss of telemetry, execute the following steps to diagnose, things like that.
By the way, here's what the calculations look like. Oops. Here, let me stop share again. Let me do that again. Sorry.
The slide rule is cool.
Here's what the calculations were in the movie, and here's the actual calculations that Jim Lovell did. This is the actual a picture of the actual numbers. Nice. Tom Hanks had actually inverted the numbers on the lines. He wrote the wrong numbers on each of the lines. But this is just simple subtraction. Like you can see this like 360 number over 302.43. That's just subtraction. So they didn't really need the slide rule to do that. I'm trusting that astronauts in space could still handle like addition, subtraction normally. But this actually went up for auction. It's not in the Smithsonian. So like there's a private owner for this sheet.
It's pretty cool.
Private owners own insane stuff I once watched a guy go up to Fred Hayes with an entire, like, one of the, I don't know if it was like the flight plan or something from Apollo 13, and he signed every single page for like whatever amount of money he was charging for autographs, which was definitely like over $150. There's like 300 pages in that thing.
Wow.
Collectors, and that's why they sell for so much, because every page is signed. I just remember watching that and I was just sitting there like, whoa.
Yeah.
They sell all those pages individually now.
Oh, that's exactly it. I have.
Yeah.
Fred Hayes is on this Earthrise right up there.
I wonder if they signed like the page that was like, this page left intentionally blank.
That is my
Signed.
favorite.
Probably.
So the cloud of that they're still showing of the venting, one of the things that was causing problems for everything was that this cloud of debris that they're in is apparently about 20 miles wide. And so when they're trying to sight on stars and things like that, and also it's other things that they can run into and additional problems, but it's like, it's real bad.
Did he use words like "goddamn"? I just can't imagine an astronaut doing that from space.
There were a handful of curses that came from Apollo astronauts, always when they didn't realize their mic was on. The best was Apollo 16, when I won't quote it, but when Apollo 16, when John Young said to Charlie Duke, "I've got the effing farts again."
So modern astronauts, when they are training in the NBL, one of the things that they do to accustom them to this is that they're everything that they say is broadcast into the visitor lobby of the NBL, so that they are constantly aware that there is a member of that it is possible that a member of the public is out there.
I would still be bad at this.
Yeah.
It's such a good scene with the kid who's like aware that the door can be a problem.
Learn how to fly all over again, but we are doing better up there now. Roger that, Aquarius. We know power this thing back up. Get her off. Okay. We're going on that. We confirm shutdown, John.
So one of the concerns about shutting things down was that they didn't actually know if they would have enough power to power it back up, because normally it took the shortest possible activation that like the checklist that they had for powering it up usually took 2 hours, but the batteries at this point only had minutes of power left. So when they're shutting it down, they are shutting it down not knowing if they're going to be able to reactivate it.
Houston, how far off course to project we are? Okay, people, listen up. Want you all to forget the flight plan. What's going on? We are improvising the movement.
Would they do this where they like drag people into a room and put up transparencies and stuff?
So this room that they're in is the room, and like in the in your background, The thing that's over your shoulder, that set of windows, that's the room that they're in. And your was Kishore, sorry, because the window that's over Trace.
We have the same thing in our mission control too. There's a side conference room called the fishbowl where you can go because everybody can see you in the glass.
So what they actually did, because it was Gene Kranz's white team that was on console when it happened, they immediately formed what he called the Tiger team because they had seen the changes, and they lived, I think it's like room 216 or something, but they lived in this room and they basically did not take breaks. And so I think at the time it was 4, I have I actually have somewhere a list of who was on console at what time for every mission, but it was 4 teams, the gold team, the black team, the maroon team, and they would just shift, and they'd swap out when the crew was sleeping or during like chill time so that no one was swapping when something big was happening. So effectively all the other teams had to take extra shifts so that these guys could just be up all the time.
Yeah.
Because they had the most understanding of what little was understood of what was actually going on.
I think it's important to point out too, just they talk about how it's going to get cold in there. And I think a lot of people assume space is cold, but space isn't necessarily cold because there's no air in it, right? So it's not cold in the way that we think of it being cold. It's just once you turn off all the computers and all the systems that are generating heat, that heat is being radiated into space because they would assume that it would be constantly being generated, right? So now that we're not generating new heat, we're not replenishing the heat that's being radiated away, it's getting cold. It's not like it's not like the spacecraft's in a freezer and the cold is coming in from the outside, which is what I think people assume. It's like, oh, we're in space and it's cold in space, so because now we turned everything off, we don't have heaters on. And it's like, no, it's the other way around. Actually, we were generating all this heat that we had to get rid of, and now we can't get rid of heat anymore, so it's going to get cold. Yeah, we're not generating new heat, rather.
That's right. Yeah, you size your radiators to dissipate. Actually, right. The problem is heat buildup usually is in space. Radiation is not a very effective way to give off heat. Right. So you have big radiators where you're trying to shunt heat away from the spacecraft, so it doesn't overheat.
But the other thing that happened, which they don't show in the movie, is that when they hit the point where they were gonna try to sleep in shifts, and they were all so tense and nervous and upset, one of the things that they did was they closed the shades, and which is something that they had trained to do, that the other astronauts who'd gone to the moon had said to do when you were sleeping, so that the sun didn't disturb you, because they were doing the rotisserie thing, so they're constantly spinning to keep the spacecraft getting evenly heated by the sun. And so they said, and you just saw that. Well, no, actually, they've just gone behind the shadow of the moon, but they closed the blinds to sleep better, not thinking about the fact that, as BOBAK said, they didn't have things generating heat except their own bodies. And that's something that someplace else Jim Lovell says that he didn't think about, and that if that he should have left them open.
I wonder what it must have felt like. I mean, I wasn't alive when this happened. I wonder what it must have felt like hearing, Walter Cronkite cut in, and essentially in the pretty late, and start talking about this kind of stuff.
Flavia's pointing out the boxes that Marion has at the house, the like NASA boxes. I think that is such a fascinating part of how the US chose to do space travel, right? The fact that we had these broadcasting systems where you could hear what was happening nearer to Cape Kennedy, but also these boxes, which I think, BOBAK, do you know anything about these? Like, is that what they looked like? What about you?
No, we haven't had anything like that for robotic spacecraft. We can dial in. I mean, nowadays you can dial into network if you have to for anomaly meetings or whatever if you're off shift.
Yeah,
But
so
we
it's
don't
called-
have anything like that.
Yeah, it's called the Squawk Box, and all of the family members of active people who were in space got it. It was hardwired directly to Mission Control, so they were getting the same feed that Mission Control was. The American public was not hearing the same things that they were. It was a direct hardwire.
Yeah. Wow.
There is no way I'd want that. There's no way I'd want that if my loved one was in space. It's like, it's just too much.
Yeah, for most people, it was, you know, most people who were listening to it didn't have things going wrong. So it was an opportunity to hear your loved one when they were far away from you. You know, and that's something that, again, I feel like a lot of people can relate to right now, being able to hear the voice of a loved one that you can't, that
Do
you are
anything else.
isolated from.
I mean, the difference here is that they were only gone for days. They weren't going to be gone for a month or something like that. But I take your point.
Well, yes and no,
Yeah.
because remember they had a 2-week quarantine before they went up.
Mm.
And then when they came back, they were also going to have a quarantine. So they were going to be a month away from their family, and they were traveling a lot. That is such a nice.
I'm on the moon. Just like Jim.
That's nice.
Like hearing him say, "What are your intentions?" makes this feel like a Southern dad asking about like somebody coming courting his daughter. But
It does, but that like some of these scenes always just give me goosebumps, and that's
Yeah.
definitely one of them.
Yeah.
I love this burn coming out. This is like the most intense thing ever.
So awesome. I'm gonna pee before we do that. Ah! Don't worry, I'll vent it while you're looking at me.
It's my pee.
So
this feels so pertinent to the now, where there's like a singular voice that's like, we have to shut it all down right now.
Yeah.
Just imagine the courage of having to stand up in a room like that. I'm not sure it actually happened this way, but having to say that in front of everyone, like we have to turn off everything, otherwise these people are going to die.
I mean, I will say that I think the culture, at least that I've experienced, is it's pretty engaging for this kind of stuff, right? Like we do really encourage people to voice their risks and concerns in these kinds of environments. You don't necessarily do it on console, like you would go to a sidebar conversation. But like a room like this, I think that's completely fair game, right? As long as you still establish command of the room, like there's not 30 voices talking at the same time.
Yeah, like I totally get that. But even if like that's the culture of the space, like there's so much at stake right now, given the circumstances, I still find it so exceptionally courageous for people to kind of put everything else aside and kind of say what's on their mind.
By the way, there's the failure is not an option line, which remember Robin and I have been on a panel with Chell where I think we discussed this, where failure is not an option only locally in that moment.
Right.
Not very aware that failure is an option overall.
Yeah.
I heard he never said that.
He didn't say that, but he liked it so much that when he wrote his memoirs after this movie came out, he took it as the title of his memoir.
Come on, Gary Sinise, you gotta save the day.
Come on, Lieutenant Dan, go get Forrest. This is a lot more serious than getting shot in the buttocks. I just love that those movies came out back to back with the two of them.
So, Amy, I don't know if you know this, but do you know if the sims that they used actually use flight-like hardware? I would have assumed no, that there was a completely separate sim than a test bed, which I would have used for this.
I think part of the, I would honestly have to look at what they were using on this mission, because I know that part of the problem before this was that the sims could not keep up with the changes that were going into flight hardware, right? That was the issue on Apollo 1. So I know they had, it was as close to flight readiness as possible, but you know, it might be like an older model and there might be changes and it's programmed to do what Apollo 13 was designed to do in terms of trajectory and all that. But as close as possible, probably, hopefully.
Do you think we'll go back to a time where men wear short sleeve shirts with ties again? I kind of miss that fashion choice.
This is.
I mean, that's something that you could bring back. You could set that as a new standard.
I'll do it in Animal Crossing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hang on, I gotta change my virtual background.
Nice.
Very nice.
Okay, you're in bags.
Yeah, bridge.
Oh,
so
let's hear about urine bags.
All right. So what they had to do was, because they could no longer dump urine over the side, they had been told to store it. What they didn't understand was that they didn't have to store it forever, that they could still dump it. There was just this period of time where they needed them to not do it. So they were filling every available container with urine instead of dumping it over the side. And what they eventually decided was that the easiest thing was that the urine collection bags that they wore inside their suits, that they would just keep those. And instead of doing what they normally did, which was to fill it and then discard it, they would keep it on. So Fred Hayes just kept his on and was basically swimming in urine, which is why when he gets sick, that is why he gets sick. Like, they don't define it in the film. He's just sick in the film. But
it's reasonably inferred that he gets a urinary tract infection. I mean, we'll come up to it soon.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't realize he was just swimming in his own urine, and that's
basically, yeah.
Come on.
So this was one of my favorite parts when I read the transcript and actually did the live tweet. I should have looked up, I just don't have it like readily available. Because when you actually read the transcript and the timestamp, this is one quick scene and it's quite dramatic. This was like 2 hours of reading up step by step, double checking, triple checking everything that happened. This was a very long procedure and it's very like systematic.
Yeah.
And they give them a bit of it, they do some other stuff, they give them the next bit, they do some other stuff, and then they go over all of it again, and then they actually do it. So it looks like they're reading it up and they're making this work real fast, but it's really like they were sort of like, okay, next, okay, wait, we need to pause and do this. Okay, now we go back to this. Like it was dramatic. It was obviously very dangerous, but it wasn't like down to the wire. It's hovering at 12 and you're going to die. It was like, we have a couple hours, we can do this.
Yeah, like ripping and building and MacGyver.
Yeah. MacGyver.
MacGyver, but a really slow 3.5 hour, 4 hour Lord of the Rings cinematic edition. Or
I wish I don't think I have it on this computer, but yeah, there were a couple of things that were so interesting to read exactly how long it took to A, come up with the things, and B, read up the procedures. Because if they got one thing wrong, that's it. You get one shot at not killing these guys. This and like the PC+2 burn that's coming up, but the other one I want to talk about I'll talk about it more when we get there, but is when they power up the command module. I'll tell you that story when we get there.
Yeah.
There, I have a MS Paint version of what we're going through right now from equipmentexplained.com, which is my favorite kind of site to explain NASA things. So this is like where the square peg was versus the round hole. And this is the basic reaction that they had to do. Is pretty simple. The deal is that they had like a 15 millimeter, 15 level, which translated to I think 15 millimeters of mercury, which translated to around I think it was like 4 or 5% CO2 concentration. And typically, like on Earth, we see cognitive impairment around 1 to 2% CO2 concentration. And like for us right now, it's about like 0.05, maybe 0.1 where you are. So that this is insane. And so like this reaction isn't complicated, but it makes like a ton of excess water, most of it which goes into like recycled water for the astronauts. And it's still commonly used. Like you go to any anesthesia department in a hospital, you'll see these canisters, which are basically the same thing as what we see. But my favorite thing, and we're coming to this, is that the key was that they had to keep the plastic bag off the container in order for the airflow to work. So the key element in all of this, beyond like, you know, sort of making this all work, was the folder, the like piece of like cardstock that they put in there to keep it away. That is like the key element that keeps the bag away from the actual airflow, so that they can maintain airflow and actually have the reaction go. That's the real hero.
Most of the guys I graduated high school with.
Thank God for folders. Like one of the other things that I think it's difficult to remember now, especially when you were watching us on YouTube gesturing, is that they had to describe this with just words. Like they couldn't show them. They had to do it with just language.
As a writer, as well, actually, at least 3 of us are write for most of the work that we do.
Yeah.
So that's not easy. That is not an easy job. You ever tried to explain? I mean, even like recipes don't always do a great job of it. Like, it can get really complicated, especially 3-dimensional space.
A friend of mine is an academician. She did her PhD in puppetry and has written extensive papers about puppet movement. This is her specialty. And she was talking about the hilarity that is trying to express subtle hand movements of a gesture to evoke emotion in something not alive, that this is like the weirdest skill set that she has. And she's like, I've thought about like, what jobs could I do? You know, she goes between teaching and all this stuff. And she's like, the one job I thought I can't believe I didn't get because I am so overly qualified for is writing instruction manuals for how to hook up DVD players. Like, that's actually really funny. You are an expert describing minute things, what they look like, and what the results should be. Yeah.
Technical writing is very complicated. Also,
I never thought about it. It was so funny.
Yeah. And I'm just like, hang on. In my other life as a professional puppeteer, I'm like, wait, have we had talked about who your friend is?
No, I don't think so, actually. But yeah.
I'd like to think that you're just talking about each other at this point.
Yeah.
I know, because you guys might know each other, actually, because there's like, from what I hear, like 25 people who are academic puppeteers in the world.
Yeah, the academic side of it is there are not that many academic puppeteers.
Yeah,
but
she's in that world. We'll talk about it not on Strong.
Yes.
Talk about this. This is very important. I want to know a lot more.
Quick shout out to all the people donating to Feeding America that are watching the live stream. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Sure. We've had like almost $50 in donations just on this stream. So thank you so much to everyone. That is so great. That almost doubles how much we've donated over the last stream and a half, 2 streams.
Yeah.
Do they actually shout at each other like this, Amy? Do you remember
If they did, it wasn't
in the transcript?
In a place that was recorded, because there's an in spacecraft recording as well as the air to ground recording. So there's no record of them shouting at each other like that. They might have had some tension, but I talked, because I've met Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes. Jack Swigert died, I want to say early 80s. So definitely before I would have been doing this professionally / was alive. But I asked both of them about like the tension and stuff, because I'd already spoken to Jerry Griffin about like building tension in the movie. And Jim Lovell told me that he couldn't really get exercised because he needed his crew to not panic, and he needed to be the leader for them.
Yeah.
And I asked Fred Hayes, when did you feel safe? When did you feel like you were coming home? And he said, I never thought we weren't coming home. I had every ounce of faith in my team in the spacecraft and our team on the ground, and we all knew what we were doing. I was like, okay. It was just the most like chill, measured response. He's such a lovely, kind guy.
Yeah.
I've actually had more in-depth conversations with him about things like the logistics of a marriage and divorce in space than I have about like the potential fact that he almost died. He's like, I'll talk about it, but I'll talk about tons of other weird stuff too.
Yeah.
Speaking of like weird stuff that we're going to talk about, this right now we're coming up at about an hour and a half into a 2-hour and change movie. So if you people who are on the stream, if you haven't synced up your film with us, there's a time code on the screen right now. But after this film, we're going to talk a little bit more about some nerdy science stuff. So feel free to stick around. If you're just joining us, you can stay for a little while after the movie, and we're going to talk some more. What are we looking at? What are we looking at on here, Kishore?
BOBAK is muted. It's his screen that he's sharing.
Oh, BOBAK.
Hey, folks. So yeah, this is the actual scene from Mission Control where they're demonstrating the use of the thing, and then this is it actually in flight.
I've seen that picture.
So it's very so cool that all this. The fact that this stuff all exists, even that's
yeah.
I knew you would be excited about this bit, Mr. Engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is my favorite.
The pictures on that
my favorite.
Them putting it together.
Yeah,
so,
I love it.
Sorry, let me go back.
There's two pictures. They're not great because it was traumatic. But there's two pictures of one you can see Jim Lovell. I believe it's Jim Lovell. I think it's Jim Lovell, and one of is Jack Swigert, and they both look like, it's weird how just calm it looks. It should be. I think it's on that
here.
page.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's just cool to look at.
Yeah, there's the folder.
No, not here.
Like them.
Yeah.
Weird. Because I know all of these things come from that website. Shout out to the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal.
I think it's kind of sad that they didn't get to land, only because, we didn't go to the moon enough times to be like, oh, well, it's fine that they didn't, This was a huge amount of scientific knowledge that we lost the chance.
Yeah.
They were landing further north than we'd ever landed. They were landing like in a different part of the moon in terms of its like geography, near like a mountain range and like a highlands area, right? So it's like
Apollo 14 went where they were supposed to go. So we did get that.
Yeah. But where was Apollo? Yeah.
By the way, that clock toy,
well,
I had
they
that.
also canceled Apollos 18, 19, and 20. So I think the bigger loss was that we lost 3 missions because Nixon got real scared.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if they didn't make it back, that probably would have been the end right then and there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a thing that, sorry, I also have the A Man in the Moon by Andrew Chaikin, which is a great book if you haven't. And I take notes. But one of the things that that Lovell said to Swigert is, I'm afraid this is going to be the last lunar mission for a long time, because he knew that when they came back that there was going to be a hiatus while they tried to figure stuff out, what had happened.
Which is not unlike other disasters we've had since, right? Anytime there's a space disaster, there's like a ground stop for a while we make sure that we know exactly what went wrong and can try and prevent it from happening again. Oh God, the soundtrack right here is so good.
Mm-hmm.
The high strings. Oh.
The CO2 level has dropped to 9. and it is still falling.
One of the things that they called it was they called it the mailbox, the thing that they built.
You know, while it wouldn't have fallen as fast as they showed in the film, the CO2 levels would have dropped pretty quickly once they hooked the thing up. So it is a fast reaction.
Yeah.
It's just not like 30 seconds fast.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, it must be a strange feeling when you solve such a massive issue and then you're like, okay, what's next to work on? Because like they're not like that doesn't even get them out of the woods. That just allows them more time to plan for like the real issue.
Yeah, they're still in the woods. They just get to walk through the woods a lot further. This is heartbreaking.
When I first saw this movie, I really didn't like these kind of human elements of the story, like seeing the family and stuff. And now years later, I think they make it so much better. Make the movie because you get the stakes in these scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that was like that poster that I showed you before, about the space eggs. It's like three people's lives depend on you handling this well. That was one of the things that they actually really worked on was making sure that people remembered that there were humans who were going up into this, that it wasn't just a piece of equipment, that there were lives going to be on this. So they called this the refrigerator. Look, that you're in transit. Poor thing. Poor thing.
Oh no, there it goes.
Yep. It's okay. It's frozen by this point. So apparently the temperatures were around in the mid 40s for them. So they were real cold.
Remember, they're Houstonians now. They've been living in Texas, so it wasn't exactly 40s was pretty cold for somebody used to Houston temperature.
Right. And also for people
like 40s. Wow, put on some shorts.
We got another question, flight surgeon, that we thought get more sleep.
Did he do this? Did he rip off his telemetry?
He would not be the first astronaut to pull them off.
I mean, we had that mutiny against wearing helmets during re-entry on Apollo 7 because they all had head colds. So,
well, except that it later that one of the, or maybe not later, but one of the things that people think is that they didn't actually have head colds, but that that was the fluid shift that happens when you're in microgravity, but that they didn't know yet that that's what was going on.
When Wally Schirra was like, nope, we're not bursting our eardrums for your protocols. Wear your helmets. Come up here and make me. Yeah.
I think the subtext of this scene is really nice, and that it's illustrating that he is a leader. And when he does stuff to follow, no matter what it is, it's rebellious. So it's even more important that he stays on and keeps, soldiering forward, because when he rebels, they rebel.
It's those shots that remind me of just like pale blue dot moments, like just.
So the other thing about this, that big screen, behind that big screen is something that they call the cave, which is a massive, very long room that's a projection room. And all of those screens are being adjusted by people. And yes, the hot dogs really did freeze. But much of the computing was actually being done by women. So there were a lot of women who were back in the cave who were involved in putting some of those projections up, or making sure that they got the correct numbers.
Yeah, it wasn't just like clicking the calculator button on your computer, letting it go. It was like people were calculating. They were the calculators.
Yes.
The computers.
Yes.
One of those things that in language we sort of forgotten. Here's urine sick Fred.
Yep. Also, according to Andrew Chaikin, he was experiencing burning pain when he urinated.
Oh. Ning pain?
I mean, that could be anything.
Right.
All you need to hold attitude is a burning pain when you urinate.
Okay. So this moment, and Amy, you jump in here because you've actually talked to the man.
I should unmute myself. Sorry.
Okay. So my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that the reason that he knew about this procedure was because on his previous flight, the computer had been accidentally shut down and they had to send up calculations that Katherine Johnson had come up with for how to navigate if you didn't have a computer. What I have heard is that the thing that happened, that the reason the computer was turned off, had accidentally shut down, was because one of the crew had accidentally turned it off.
On Apollo 8?
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
It's not in his autobiography.
I should check this book right now.
But it's something that he talks about in a later interview, that they had all agreed to not tell Houston what, because they were afraid that if they told them why they had lost it,
right,
that they would never let them go back into space.
It's been a long enough time since I've been through it. If I can't remember if that's the case or not. I know that they simulated ways of doing it. I can't remember reading about if it had happened on a previous mission or if it happened in training.
No, it did happen on a
I'll trust you on it because you've got the book in front of you.
I do. I'm like, well, let me flip back to
I know,
the tab
I'm
that I have.
trying to see. There is an index.
Did women like Poppy Northcutt also work on the computer part for Apollo 13? Like, I know she worked on 11.
Yeah, she would have still been in there, but although she was not a computer in the same way.
No, not like Katherine Johnson.
Yeah,
but I think she must have worked on the system that was doing some of those calculations in the room.
Yeah. I am looking it up right now. Well, you were looking it up too, Amy.
I know, I'm trying to see. God, the music in this scene is so...
I know.
So crazy.
And like, it is not meant to do this thing that they're doing.
Yeah. I think that's
one of them is handling pitch and the other's handling roll. Is that right?
yes, and it's backwards because of it's upside down because of the orientation of the lunar module. It's not designed to fly like that. It's designed to land upright on the moon. No, I don't have they're all in a box in my cabinet. It's designed to land like this, not fly like this. So it's off. The two of them are doing this thing that it's not designed to do, and they have this mass of the command service module that's just dead up there trying to do it. And it was one of those, like, they do say it was probably the scariest thing of all of the scary things.
Yeah.
I think we can all relate that you're not meant to drive a lunar module by looking out the windshield.
No. And lest we forget, if you're looking at mine, like, those are tiny. Those windows.
Boy, if I were the engineer, though, I'd be so proud that the lunar module worked in that condition, like in a completely unintended design.
Yeah.
I like that the condensation is there. And I remember looking that up. That's like a real thing. It has to do with, the fact that they lost a source of heat and they're all breathing hot. They're breathing saturated water air as they're breathing in and out because humans are disgusting bags of water and meat. When they, this is a thing that they're about to talk about, is like they're going to boot everything back up, and they're worried that there's water inside of the panels as well as outside, and that, as we all, anyone who's ever dropped their phone in water or spilled water on their laptop, those things do not go well together.
The other thing I think that's worth pointing out, because we just mentioned Apollo 8 and Lovell, is that this is the second time that he's gone to the moon. The first time he was not going to land by design, but because we had sped everything up in order to beat the Russians, like 8 was not the choice that they made with 8 was that they went to the moon without the LIM because it wasn't ready. So they didn't have the lifeboat. So if this disaster had happened on 8, they would have all died because they didn't have a lifeboat.
Yeah.
It's important to note that the entire operations team got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Nixon, like, after they got back. So not only did the astronauts get it, and he awarded it to them, in Hawaii where they were recovering, but Nixon went to Houston and gave it to every single member of the team. I can't imagine what that moment would have felt like.
This is a real story.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I love this story. I love that it's a real story. I'm also pulling up the Apollo 8 mission report right now. It's just taking a while to download while I'm also uploading.
Also, I get total chills during this little solo trumpet.
Yeah.
Damn those trumpets and their sultry sounds. What is a helium disk, and why did it burst?
I don't remember.
I am switching back to the
exactly what this was, and it was a nothing thing that happened, but I don't remember.
Yeah, it is
Looks like it's some sort of pressure relief system so that the inside pressure on tanks don't go to catastrophic level.
Yeah.
Oh. This is a thing that I'd forgotten that also happens, which isn't in the film. But Houston tells them that water is tight, that they have to conserve it because of the numbers that Hayes is running and that Mattingly is running, that they have to conserve water. And so Lovell decides to ration drinking water. And because of this, and because in 0G astronauts don't feel as thirsty, they don't register it as much, they were all getting dehydrated in addition to being cold and tired.
Oof.
So it was affecting their ability to and also even with the scrubbers, they still had more CO2 in the atmosphere than they really should, which is actually kind of par for the course for them. But so they were all getting a little stupid.
Now!
Oh, the scene.
So good.
Yeah.
I know it's just the test, but I'm still so tense for the test part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That and the music is so good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This track is so good.
Oh. You never. Good storytelling, man. You're pointing the camera at a freaking like VU meter with the right soundtrack. Some dudes doing this. And a VU meter. You got it.
It's also crazy to me that we're talking about a 20 amp circuit, which is like all of our homes have 20 amp circuits. They're like $4 if you go down to like Home Depot or something to buy.
I mean, to be fair, right? Like Curiosity operates on a less than now at this point 100-watt nuclear power source. So you're talking about a light bulb's worth of power powering a rover on Mars. I mean, we can store energy and reuse it at different times, but it's the light bulb's worth of energy all day.
That's crazy. And also amazing.
That was their code, just in case anyone missed that.
Okay, I know they probably picked up that lettuce and washed it again, but for some reason it always bothers me that they put the lettuce back in the bowl in that scene. Every time I'm like, ew, don't do that. Don't mix it.
Yeah. I also love this.
This is cute. This is great.
And she's like,
so good.
Like, I'm proud of my son. Who are you?
Here we go. The cognitive impairment of this moment really like struck. It starts to like weigh in the film how really under stress they are.
Yeah, not just like tired, but having high CO2 levels and being dehydrated, like Mary Robinette was saying, and everything, plus the stress and the fear, and
and sleep deprivation and cold.
There's a lot of psychology going on that this movie doesn't really talk about it too much, but
I think to Kishore's point earlier, right? Like there's a lot of humility obviously in that moment to be able to say, like, as an astronaut, I cannot do these things. Like, and of course, your life
which is
on the
again
line,
a thing that they're trained to do,
right?
To trust the people on ground.
And the self-awareness of just being able to say this is a thing that, and it's not just that I can't comprehend it, it's like I'm having trouble reading my own writing. Like that's very specific. Like I can comprehend what you're saying, but I can't read when I transcribe it.
Yeah, and everyone understands what he's trying to communicate in that moment.
Yeah.
Instantaneously, but
this also thing, the fact that the numbers were a little bit off, or were off because they had been calculating it based on the assumption that
different mass. Yeah. On a much greater mass.
Okay, so when I was doing the live tweet 5 years ago and read the transcript and the whole part about this and reading up the power up procedures for the command module at this point, it's so interesting. There's this one, I should find it, but there's a point where whoever's on Capcom at the time says, we're just about ready. We've got the procedure to read up to you, but we need to wait a minute because a lot of people worked on this and they all want to be in the room when we read it up to you guys. And there was no other things said in that mission that made me get really emotional, because it was so this like really interesting, very just authentic, like it's business as usual, but like a lot of people care and a lot of people want to be here when we do this. And they waited for everybody to get there. And I don't know, there's just such a human moment, like so much of the transcripts, even though like there's definitely moments of humanity involved, see my P, this one gets really technical, and there's definitely human moments, because they had this is fast. They had a lot of downtime and they're just like waiting. So it was like reading up some news, sports scores. They all love the sports scores, but like there's a moment where you feel the danger and the drama in this like very simple human statement of like, a lot of people worked on this and we all want to be here. And Jerry Griffin told me, he actually told me the story when he was playing softball, when he had been playing softball. He went to a friend's house for a beer after the game, and the friend's wife said, Jerry, your wife called and they need you at NASA. He went sweaty in his sweatpants to mission control and like didn't go home. So all the guys in ties, like half of them were actually just in sweats, which is like very uncommon for 1970, right?
Yeah.
But I just love this scene. I love that everyone's in the room when they do this, because like they waited to get everyone in the room just so they could all be there to see what had just happened.
Yeah.
I thought that's my favorite moment
beautiful.
on the whole mission.
Yeah.
That's
so
my story.
No, I'm like that is not a thing I knew, and it's fantastic. One of the things that I was there was a thing that we passed already, but when they're thinking about powering up and everything, and everything is covered in condensation, there's a thing that
the toast to the car wash
that they actually had to wipe things down. Because because there was the thought of if this shorts and causes a spark, that's what happened to Apollo 1.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good.
Yeah, so good.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to speak for the rest of the movie.
That's fair. And they thought they'd see like a puncture.
The transcripts for this part in particular, I find riveting, because
really interesting. I mean, they had it's spanning away from them. Like they didn't have. It's not like they could look at it and like fly around it and like really investigate. They're just trying to get as much detail committed when they see it so they don't forget something. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's like, we're telling you everything and debriefing constantly just so we don't forget details. And it's the urgency and kind of like focus that's evident when you know what else is going on is just like,
yeah. But that line about there's one whole side of the spacecraft missing is like straight out of the transcript.
Yeah. There's a lot of bits and pieces out of this that are right out of the transcript. One of my favorites, which is ages ago, we passed it, is they do something and he just says feedbacks are barber pulled, which means that it's switched over and shows that something is locked. I think it's for the talking. And it's such a minor little thing. And I'm like, oh,
that's beautiful.
But that's right. That's just the technical term. And they put it in, they make it a throwaway thing. So you know from context, it means this is done. But the space nerds are like, oh, you actually like took the care to show that it's done in the right way.
Yeah.
You can actually watch the old broadcast from the time of the reentry, and everyone was watching. Like, it wasn't, like 69, but I mean, pretty much the world was captivated by this moment of watching the reentry, and they had live feeds of what was going on.
Yeah, like Times Square was filled with people watching.
I love the juxtaposition of those two shots of like him seeing the horizon, her being in a nice sunny day.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so creepy.
Even if with all those images we see from space with this viewpoint,
there's
like
something,
it's so majestic.
There's something about the ones from Apollo 13 too. I think it's like the film that they were using in the era, but like there's some of the most beautiful, intense pictures of the Earth. I'm gonna tweet a thread of some tomorrow. And the moon, they did plenty of time to take a bunch of pictures, and they did.
Yeah.
They have some really, really beautiful pictures of the Earth and the moon on this one.
It's probably a good distraction for them as well. Just like something that they could spend some time on.
Oh, a lot of stuff was like, let's keep you busy. That's like, hence the chatting during downtime and talking about sports. Like they did it on every mission so they wouldn't go nuts. Like, there's very little quiet time. A lot of like, let's do some busy work. Let's take some pictures. Let's talk about baseball.
Yeah.
I love this.
But no.
Good thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, smart. Don't do that. I did put, for the people watching, I put a link to the transcripts in the chat so you can watch them there or read along.
So this jettison, according to them, that the jolt from the jettison was actually louder and more violent than the oxygen tank explosion had been. And the Odyssey actually, here, I will read from the Odyssey pitched perilously close to gimbal lock, but Swigert quickly steadied the ship. So like, because it's an explosive bolt that is separating them. So they it actually, and it was supposed to happen at a totally different point in the mission.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing that happened in this separation, because they weren't able to, they didn't have any fuel to gain distance from the spacecraft, and they needed to not smash into it during reentry. They actually left some pressure in the tunnel so that the explosion would actually give them some distance. And there was a huge issue of where do we put the lunar module, because it's not designed to re-enter the atmosphere. It's probably not going to make it, but there is plutonium on board. So what do we do with that? So they actually had done this accidentally on Apollo 10. They'd left pressure in the tunnel when they separated the two spacecraft. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. And they did it, and that's how they gained. So like that's also part of why it was so jarring, because like there's an explosive decompression along with the separation, and it's so icy and cold in there.
Yeah.
They don't know, do they?
I love how Ed Harris delivers that line.
Yeah.
And they don't need to know, do they?
That's right. Finest hour.
Also, I feel like he's never mentioned by name, but that dude that keeps just like giving pointed looks at everybody is supposed to be Chris Kraft. Like he doesn't, I don't think he says or does anything. He's just like,
yeah.
Who is Chris Kraft?
Sorry, I'm into this now. Chris Kraft was the original flight director, so he's kind of the one who set the tone for NASA in the era. He was the one who was head flight controller, sort of like leading the teams as they started to go through different shifts. He's kind of like the guy who created the idea of flight. Yeah.
And when you go to JSC, the crypt, it's named like the mission control building is named after him. Re-entry.
Here comes the rain. I feel like the hardest part of this would be the backwards, just going backwards.
So one of the things that they're also worried about is the condition of the heat shield, because they don't know whether or not it has been damaged.
Yeah. That's part of the reason they held on to the back of that module for so long, is they didn't want the cold to damage it even further if it had already been damaged. And it's just like, oof.
This blackout must have felt like decades.
Yeah.
There's a curiosity anomaly. There was video of all of us, and it took longer than expected for the response to occur from the spacecraft. It's not good, because then your mind starts going on to like everything is not going right. Like it must have been ruined.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're one of the people that can speak to this, the feeling that they were probably feeling at times, for them much more so even. But
yeah.
Woo!
Yay. Also, a shout out to all of the extras in those scenes who are doing really good work for me. They're there. So apparently inside the capsule, Level is telling his crew, gentlemen, be prepared for a hard landing, because when 8 had come down, it had like hit the ocean.
I'll share a clip after the movie is done of what it actually looked like on broadcast at that time, a short clip.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to hear the actual response when they first make
nice.
radio contact.
God, that's gorgeous.
So did they reenact this for the film? Is that when they shot it? I assume they went out somewhere and
The
reenacted it
splashdown,
all.
I think, was a quarter scale model. And then that's obviously,
right.
You know, looks good from the outside.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
But I believe the shots that were on the TV from Cronkite, those are the real, that was real footage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every time, anytime the hatch opens, the divers are apparently like, oh God, the aroma that comes out of it.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, that was another Jim Lovell flight. Jim Lovell and Frank Borman on Gemini 7 was the longest duration at the time. It was 2 weeks because they were testing the fuel cells for Apollo. And the first thing when they opened the hatch at the end of the mission and the frogman opened the door, the first thing they said was, "It smells like a latrine in there." And that's when they learned that you can't air out a spacecraft.
Yeah.
But it's like a pet store. It only smells bad if you just walk in.
Once you're used to the fact that you're sitting around in the smells of poo, it's probably okay.
Yeah, you probably don't notice unless it's fresh.
Okay, we are going to be quiet when he says, when Jim Lovell makes his cameo coming up, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
My favorite moment.
Here he goes.
Our mission is called a successful failure, in that we returned safely but never made it to Moon. In the following months, it was determined that a damaged coil built inside the oxygen tank sparked during our cryostor and caused the explosion at the beyond. It was not defect. It occurred 2 years before I was even named to flight to Moon. Fred Hayes was going back to the Moon on Apollo 18, but his mission was canceled because of budget cuts and never flew in space again. Nor did Jack Swagger, who left the astronaut corps and was elected to Congress from the state of Colorado. He died of cancer before he was able to take office. Ken Mattingly orbited the Moon as command module pilot of Apollo 16. Gene Kranz retired as director of operations. Many other members of Mission extraordinary days for Apollo 14. I watched walk on Earth, all in the confines of mission control and our oxygen. I sometimes catch myself remembering the change our fortune in the war. Thinking thousands of people who work between us. I look up at the moon and wonder, when will we come back?
Yay!
Such a good movie.
Do we know what Tom Hanks? Do we know what Tom Hanks said to him during that little exchange?
No,
I've
I
always
was
wondered
just
that.
having the same thought. I was just like, what were they talking about?
Hey, Google it.
I'm
I feel like I
is
looked it
that
up once, but I don't remember it.
like, is that a scripted thing or are they ad-libbing there?
I think it was just like, hi.
I hope it was ad-lib.
I don't think it was scripted.
Here, I'm going to show real quick what it looked like
Turn
upon
this
re-entry.
down now.
Yes, please.
So this is the live feed from Mission Control. This is during the blackout, what it looks like.
And they still don't know why that blackout was longer than usual.
No.
We've had a report that a RIA 4 aircraft has acquisition of signal.
And that's the moment they know it's a...
They're through.
Odyssey Houston standing by, over. Okay, we read you, Jack.
Oh, they actually have jackets on.
That was Jim Lovell responding with the OK, Joe.
Here, and I'll fast
Correction there, that
forward.
was Command Module Pilot Jack Swigert.
I'll fast forward a second to when they
Time
actually
of-
see it for the
Out
first time.
that then drag out previous small edge of this flight. I don't know what drogues deployed means, but
Standing by for confirmation
So the drogue shoot, I
of
should let
green shoots.
Bobak explain what a drogue shoot is.
No, it's good. Go ahead, please.
It's kind of a conical chute that controls the
There they are.
orientation of the main parachute,
They've made it.
and it does a preliminary slowdown before the main.
All three shoots out. Listen to the crowd on the boat.
How did I do?
Really looks great.
Good. It's very parachute dynamics are one of those things that are still a little bit of
Extremely
a
loud applause here in
not
Mission
super well understood
Yeah.
physics. And so it's yeah, the drogue chute is helps to pull out the main parachute as well as and I think control the inflation dynamics of the main chute.
Yeah.
so
So good. So
yeah, I mean,
literally just
well, I mean, Bobak, you're like in the middle of all the emotions. Are you?
that's great.
Does it ever get old to you?
No.
Does viewing it ever change?
No, I think it's yeah, I think you notice different things, of course, about the movie too, like all movies when you watch it, but it's such an incredibly good feeling, right? Like this idea that, you know, and through all of this, you're able to, you know, especially with human missions, I can only imagine that part, but just like to save a human life. And I don't know, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I am like just going to watch launches without being involved in any aspect of making them happen is amazing. And then mapping it onto like what this must feel like. Pretty darn cool.
I think back to this movie anytime there's one of those discussions about should we go to X, should we go to Y, and because those inevitably when I'm in those discussions, it like if like we forget what it felt like, what it like, how much it brought, how much it impacted everyone else that was back on Earth.
Yeah.
And that's really like we could talk about the science of the mission, we could talk about the achievement, all of that. Like the only reason any of this matters, and especially it's apparent in Apollo 13, is what happens to all of us what the impact to all of us is, the context behind it.
Kjell Lindgren, who's one of the modern astronauts, said that when people ask him, why should we send people to the moon or people to Mars when we can send robots, which do very good work? And his answer is, well, why should you go to Yellowstone? You can send robots there, you can read a book. Why should you go? And
I love that.
Yeah, it's the human experience is different.
I also need to laugh just a little bit at the idea of a modern astronaut, just because the whole thing in history's context is so still now. Like, it's just a very funny. It's a very funny statement. I wasn't certainly not to poke at your thing, but it's just in my mind, space exploration is still such an infancy, right? Like to say like distinguish between. It's not. I mean, 50 years is a long, right? I mean, it's a long time. And
well, and it's actually we've been doing space exploration for more than 50 years. Sure. It's just those Apollo guys.
No, it is also very strange to me, right? Thinking like when we say it's 1970, because right, like it is not that recent and things were very different, and so it is, but it's still very odd to me.
Yeah, careful there a little bit, since I was born the year of Apollo 11, and I think I am older than everyone in the room. I like how my arm keeps appearing and disappearing with this particular
contrast.
Yeah.
I want to show off my favorite Apollo 13 thing.
Yes, please.
Which is my favorite just sort of space book is Full Moon, which is just an assembly of images from all of the space flight that went there. And my favorite image is, oh God, this.
You may have to turn off your background on this one.
Yeah. Oh, wait, can I, while you're looking for that, I'm going to do a little bit of magic here. So here I am, and I'm holding a thing, and then look, I've made a coffee mug appear, and then it's gone again. And then look, it's back. And then as you are doing that, I can make myself disappear.
Wow. You're magical.
We're discovering too many things about Zoom from having all these Zoom-based meetings.
Hi, I'm a science fiction writer. The first thing I do is play with the technology.
So this
also puppeteer.
This is Full Moon by Ken Licht, which is just an assembly of photographs from our area of missions to the moon. My favorite image is this one from Apollo 13. Which is just like the half Earth, because like for all the images of the astronauts and of the moon and of the equipment, like this is like the whole, like this is why we do it, is for the shots of Earth.
It's so true.
And I love seeing the Earth in like repose like that.
Yeah. So can you show it again?
Yes, it might take me a second because I lost the
it's okay. So one of the things, because remember I talked about how when they're coming in to land on the moon, that that they're coming in at dawn at whatever site that they're landing at. The from the moon, what they're seeing is the Earth being like the Earth-Sun relationship and the moon. Anyway, I'm explaining this incredibly badly, but like if it's a quarter moon that we're seeing, they are also seeing they're seeing a 3/4 Earth at that point, right? Or is it?
I think.
Or no, they're seeing a quarter Earth, but it's the other side. It's the waxing, the waning.
Yes. Yeah. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. I was like, I had to track this for the for one of the novels. I had to track like time of day. But it is that they're seeing the opposite of what we're seeing when they're on the moon. So right, full moon,
that makes
new
sense.
Earth. Yes, full moon, new Earth.
Is there anything in the movie that irritated you though? Like we could have this love fest about the movie, And we talked about a couple things that were wrong. Like there was only one thing in the movie that bugged me, and it only I only became aware of it in the last couple years. It's that when they're in space, you can like look out over their shoulders, and they constantly are seeing different phases of the moon as they're traveling towards and away from it in a way that is just not possible. And it's like the simplest little like thing, and I'm like, at one point there's a shot of Tom Hanks and his behind his back you can see the earth, and then there's a shot of Bill Paxton and behind his back you can see the moon, and the way the sun is in the picture is just all sorts of wrong, like there'd just be shadows everywhere, and yeah, it was problematic. I don't want to Neil Tyson this, but that was the only thing that I felt like they didn't get right.
I can't hear anything anyone has said because my cat has pulled there. What?
He said he didn't want to Neil Tyson it.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty good.
No, I mean, nothing really bothers me, I guess, in that movie.
The only thing that bothers me is the lettuce.
Yeah, I mentioned
every time I'm like, don't put floor lettuce back in the bowl. I don't know why it bugs me so much, but no, I feel like I know there are things that they had to take liberties with. I know there's things that were dramatized. Like I think the Jim Lovell's sort of fantasy on the moon, I think that sequence is like, as moving as it is, it's always been kind of weird. Because when I met him a few years ago, I actually tried to ask him about that time of being behind the moon when seeing it on 13, when like you've been one of the first people ever to see it on 8. Then you're seeing it again, it's still amazing, but you might die. How did it feel? Was it different? And that was when he sort of started with, well, we had a bit of a problem on Apollo 13, and I wasn't gonna, so that's the story. When I let him finish, then asked him about a completely other, deeply non-known thing about the 1967 seaworthiness test he did, and he was like, oh, so yeah, I never got that answer, but I always found that like that little fantasy sequence a little weird, but like that's the only thing that maybe bugs me. But for like, I can ignore all the things because like for me this is a good space movie, and this being such a good space movie is why I don't like science fiction, because like I don't mean, no, here I should say this, I don't like science fiction movies, but I like science fiction books.
Yeah, fair.
Because there's something that bothers me about like, you're in space, why are you running down the hall like you're on Earth, versus like the science fiction that's like, oh, you've created an alternate reality where there's something, but it's actually
it's okay. It's okay.
I
do, because I actually have this problem with science fiction movies too frequently, but often I'm watching them, I'm like, try getting a science fiction writer to write your science fiction movie.
Yeah. That's what gets me, is like, maybe it's the space stuff. Like there's science fiction. Like we watched The Adjustment Bureau last weekend, and like that was a fun movie, total science fiction, but I really enjoyed it. The space movies where it's like, none of this is what would happen, and I just can't unsee it. It just bugs me. But I feel like you reacted to the seaworthiness test story, so I'm going to tell you what that was real quick. So I need a model. So this capsule is a conical thing, and stable 1 is when it's like the flat side down, the apex up, because that's when you're lying on your back and that's comfortable. Those 3 balloons on top are designed such that if you come down with the apex down, which is stable 2, they'll inflate and they'll right you. So in 1967, they figured they had to do this test to make sure that A, the bags would actually right properly and safely for the crew, and B, that the spacecraft was watertight for 2 days. Because if they splashed down off target, the furthest point, so they had a primary, a secondary, and a contingency recovery zones. They could roughly make them land close to that. The furthest point from any recovery crew would be about 2 days. So they had to make sure that they could land upside down in any kind of weather and be okay to survive for 2 days. So Jim Lovell, and I forget who else was in there, they strapped in like after a mission, they plunked down upside down in the Gulf of Mexico in 5-foot swells, righted, and then had to hang out for 2 days. In radio contact, there was a boat there just to make sure if anything went wrong, but they had to be in there to make sure that it would be okay if they had it in an emergency situation. And I asked him about it, and I could just see his face change. He's like, oh, kitty. like, you know about that? I'm like, I read about it, I wrote about it. It's really like a weird thing. You know, people think being an astronaut is all glamour. Like, that is not glamour. And he's like, you know, I was a sailor, and that thing was no bleeping boat. It's like, got it.
Yeah.
I think we've definitely helped people understand that this is not a glamorous position, where we talked about how bad it smelled, and all of that stuff.
Like,
here's like a, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I think we'd all do it, but like, I would be under no illusions. Like, it'd be gross.
Yeah.
And
no,
like,
it-
Gross, but I would do it. Yeah.
I would do it. I mean, I'm definitely like medically unfit and unqualified. All of that aside, I would do it, but I would not expect it to be nice.
Yeah. No, I open every time they have applications. I open up the application and I think I'm gonna, and then I'm like, you don't have any degree at all. Like, not even, it's not just a matter of, I don't have a STEM degree. It's like, I left college after 3 years to go be a professional puppeteer for 25 years. Like, I am so on paper, like, I don't have any of that. And yet, if I had any way to go, I would go.
I know. I feel
BOBAK,
like
did you apply?
So yeah, I applied in, I think like
you
the
applied multiple times, right?
happy hour. This is my second time. The happy hour that Serafina and I were on, it was very interesting filling it out in the context of quarantine and like having unusual stressors and realizing like, oh, some of these questions are really applicable to my experience right now. So I was able, I think I actually able to maybe, answer more honestly, or at least more experientially honestly, than even previous ones, right? Where I was like, oh, I'd be fine in that situation, versus now I'm like, oh, I'm actually experiencing that, and I can tell you how I'm doing. So yeah.
How do you enjoy quarantine?
It's not my favorite, but I mean, I'm handling it.
Yeah.
Here's my weird thought about this movie. So this came out in 95, 25 years after the events, and now we're 25 years later right now.
Right.
So like, I think it's weird to think about that this movie came out the same distance to the actual event as we are now to the movie coming out. Which leads me to,
that is weird to think about.
Yeah.
Which leads me to ask, would you want to see this movie remade? Like 25 years, that's like prime Hollywood. We got to remake it.
I don't think this is a remakeable movie.
Stop
You're not going to improve
movies.
it, you know? You're not going to make this movie better.
I want them to cast some YouTube stars and remake this movie. That's really the.
I mean,
let's remake Space Camp. That movie, we can remake that.
That movie needs to be
YouTube
remade.
star, like BOBAK will be in it. I'll be in it. Amy, you can be in it. You know what? All five of us, we can all be in that movie. It'd be great. It'd be a really good remake.
I mean, they are doing something for Disney Plus with that, right? They are actually turning that into a show or a series. So I am excited for that. I have a genuine love for 1986 Space Camp. It's a very over-the-top movie.
I got to watch that with BOBAK on my last visit with him. So if you want to do another live stream of watching Space Camp again.
Oh my gosh, that's a good idea.
That's a harder watch for me for some reason. I don't know why. I think I'm in agreement with you. Like, I think there'd be interesting things they could do if they remade it in terms of the visuals we get. But they're not telling a better story than this. They're not getting better acting than this. They're not going to get a better score than this.
No.
This was sort of like note perfect.
Yeah, well, and also because they were doing the Vomit Comet, because it's not CGI'd, CGI that's not holding up. It's like they were floating. That's like, this is why practical effects are frequently better.
Right, because then you're limited to doing things correctly and not the way that you might want to, but wouldn't be accurate or even possible.
Yes.
And
I also think,
to kind of go back just a little bit, the thing that always, and this is not a this movie thing, it's a most movies thing, is when they do outside space shots. Anytime like the close up of his fingers and the regolith, I'm like, you're dragging your fingers through sand, man. Like I get it. I get what you're doing. That's not what regolith looks like. That's not how it would act. That's not, like, all of that is fine.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that bothers me. And it's like, but also there are no practical effects that can replicate that kind of stuff. Like that needs to be done in a very accurate physics program that was designed to be made for film, right?
Yeah.
It's just like you need to build each of those particles to make them work the way they would off of the planet.
And they could do that. They could make a giant vat of simulated regolith, and it would be the probably single most expensive shot in that movie.
It'd be so good.
It'd be so good. No, I actually got to play with simulated regolith once. It was very interesting at the Dust Laboratory at UC Boulder.
Can I just come and hang out with you and follow you places? Because you're doing all of the things that I want to be doing.
I've done some really cool stuff. I have a picture somewhere. I actually got to hold a sample of regolith from Apollo 17, obviously in a little canister. I couldn't touch it. But I went to this lab where they were looking at they were shooting particles of the simulated regolith, so it was not weathered, basically, at materials to understand how materials that are floating in the moon has a massively scant atmosphere, but there are particles that do float, how they would interact with spacecraft at low orbits. And they were just firing these particles to see what kind of materials would stand up with it. And we were all allowed to like stick our hand in a bucket of fake regolith. And let me tell you, that stuff is sticky. Like it's not weathered. It gets in like the creases of your hands. You like touch a little bit of it. You're like, wow. And it just like gets in. You're like, it's not, you do this. Oh shoot. And then it's just like, it's in your pants and it's not going anywhere. It was super neat. It was very interesting. And also like, why did you let us play with your really expensive test? There was like 11 of us. It wasn't like a, regolith fight, but it was cool. It was very cool.
Sticky is not the word. Sticky is not the word I would have expected you to use.
Yeah.
Like I've heard like, abrasive and like, kind of that and like really
not
fine.
Like physically sticky, but like the way, drier lint is sticky, and that like if you are cleaning your lint filter and it sticks to your pants, it just kind of sticks to you and you don't know why. It's that weird, like it just gets into every tiny crevice because it doesn't roll off. It just bites in.
Yeah. There was something, I don't remember this well. There was a concern about the ionization of the regolith and whether or not it was going to cause problems. Shoot, I don't remember this well. But one of the things that they were worried about was that potentially, there was the whole, are they going to sink through the dust? But there was also a concern about whether or not it would cause shorts. And I don't remember this well at all, except that it was a concern, but then it turned out to not be a problem.
I do think that's interesting, though. I went to a talk at the Smithsonian with Michael Collins and John Glenn, and they talked a lot about all of the different tests that they were putting the Mercury astronauts through and why they had to do all these things. And I think what you're saying speaks to that idea of like, we didn't know what would happen.
Yeah.
We didn't know. And so it's like, well, we have to be prepared for all of the different things that could potentially happen so that if they do happen, we're ready. And like they talked about how they would put them through all these tests, and you see all of this footage, this like vintage footage that Amy has watched 7 or 8 times entirely. And like, it's them doing ridiculous things like blowing this tube for as long as possible. Not to say that's ridiculous, but it's just the first thing that comes to mind, right? It's this very visual thing. And they did it so that they could test all of these they tested literally everything they could think of because they wanted to make sure they were ready, which is awesome.
Yeah, the philosophy for Mercury was like, send the most physically fit guys up and hope they die the least.
Yeah. Which
die the least.
Yeah. They're going to get hurt. They're going to decondition.
Yeah.
Something's going to go wrong. They'll die the least.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, which is also, again, when we're talking about modern astronauts, one of the things when Scott Kelly went up that he talks about in his book is that he had bad reactions to being in space. And so when they were talking about who was going to go up for the year-long mission, that they had initially thought not him because of his negative reactions. And the argument that he made was, if you want to know all of the things that can go wrong, send someone up who doesn't handle it well, because you're going to get a much better picture than if you send someone up who's you know, who's like, space, whatever.
Oh, so we got to send Seth Rogen to space. He's like, for some reason, he's like the first name that popped into my mind
like,
of
why,
like somebody
why?
that's not going to handle this well at all.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I just do that the whole time.
Yeah, in my fantasy land where I did apply for the astronaut program, the thing that I was going to try to tell them was, you know, there's a lot of people who applied and haven't gotten in. What you should look at as PR for people to understand how difficult the astronaut program is someone who's completely unqualified going through the selection process to explain to regular people what it's like if you're a regular person trying to pretend to be an astronaut. And then all of this happened. I'm like, they don't need any additional stress, even the one extra application that this would be.
We should wrap up. We've been watching this movie. This was awesome. Thank you all for joining us. Especially thank you to everyone that watched and everyone that was involved in the film. My last question is, what's your favorite moment of the story? Whether it be real or just something from the movie itself that still gets you to this day.
I still think it's the go no go poll in the launch. I like every launch I watch, the go no go poll. I just get like just a childhood level of joy from hearing each station be like go. It's very, I don't know. It really builds the anticipation for me.
Yeah. I that's launch. Like, I will never the day that I watch a launch without getting emotional, even a launch that's in film, is the day that you should check for my pulse.
That's a good answer. Amy, how about you? Like, you've seen it all. You've been to all these places. You've played with fake regolith. You've done it all. Is there still something that gets you?
I think it's when it's like it's a toss-up between when they have to shut down everything, shut down the lunar module, shut down all of the computer, and just like you're done. Like that to me is like one of those moments that is never not, like, as much as the launch and the splashdown are really emotional, like that's just when you feel a seriousness and like a gravity. That, and when they're powering up, I think my favorite little moment is when they're powering up the lunar module and the lights flicker and you see it from the outside. Just like the sketchiness of that, like, always gives me a tense, and like seeing it from the outside with nothing around it, the vastness of space gives you a sense of like how tenuous everything was that their survival depended on. And that, for some reason, is like the visual that really hits it for me. I love that.
I'm with Amy. That's the stuff that gets me in this movie. Is I think they did a really good job of showing the sense of scale. Like, we sort of poked fun at them being like, Gary would never get that close. Would they be able to stand that close? And it's like, this is a giant missile filled with fuel with teeny humans on the top. And like, they get into space and they are teeny tiny in the middle of nowhere. So every one of those shots where they can really give you that sense of how small and how fragile all of their things are, is just, those are the ones that really like, the one that pops into my head right now is like day 6 when they're heading back toward Earth, when you pointed out the blue dot, and it's just like they fly by off in the side and you're so far away from them that they just, it's, every time I see those, I love them. I love them so much. And of course the launch scene, amazing.
Yeah.
So good.
I don't know if
I asked people in the chat, and Kendra saying, who's been with us since early on. Thank you, Kendra, for watching. My favorite moment, she says, is Gary Sinise's expression when he figures out how to save 4 amps. That's good.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, and I'll say my other favorite moment is Tom Hanks saying, "Yeah, sure, no." the dad on that is just great.
I don't know if it's real or not, and I actually never want to know if it's real or not. But especially right now, when Gene Kranz says, turns the idea of tragedy and says, "I think this will be our finest moment," I don't know, especially now, that gets me. Like, that whole idea of being too locked in on a tragedy and focusing on the negative and finding an endless kind of boundless optimism, but it's still grounded in reality is such a lesson. So if you know if that happened or not, don't tell me. I don't want to know. I don't want to ruin the moment, because it felt so like, you know, I know it feels so made for the movie, but I don't care. I love that moment. And of course, like when Tom Hanks was just chatting there with Jim Lovell at the end, there's something about the seeing them together after going through that and seeing the real man that went through all this.
Well, thanks guys for joining us. I'm glad that you suggested this on our last happy hour, Bobak. I think that's awesome. People on the chat who are still here, if you want to see more movies for us to watch, I'm interested. I don't know if you guys want to watch more movies, but I'm down to watch more space movies. You want to like watch Sunshine or some shitty movie?
I love Sunshine. Wait, how's that shitty? It's such a good movie.
No, Sunshine is great up until it changes into a different movie.
Sure, fair.
Yes. This is why we should keep doing this.
I have a question for the audience. It could be offline. I call it a homework question. I want to know, when eventually the cost of getting things into space is low enough, what is the first, I'm going to say not adult movie that will be made in space? Like, what is the like, what movie? Because I know, like the obvious.
Because you're correct.
Answer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're correct about that.
I want to know the non-obvious answer. What is
the second movie to be made?
The second movie to be made in space.
This is a good one. I like this.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's We Bought a Zoo.
It'll be the Tiger King movie. For no reason, just random.
Tiger King in space.
It'll all be algorithm based. They'll be like, you know what's popular? Space, tigers. Okay, we got the movie.
Yeah.
Joe Exotic makes a cameo.
Yeah.
I mean, if anyone needs a novel to make in space, I have some.
You do.
Love it. Love the pitch.
Somebody's gonna set the "woke up this morning" to like a scene from an Apollo mission.
Yeah.
They're gonna set the Joe Exotic song.
Yeah.
Trace, thanks for doing all the heavy lifting to get us together.
It was so fun. This was super cool. And now that we've got it done once, we can do it again. So before we end real quick, oh, kitty, everybody, there is people's links to their socials, their books. Amy's got a new book out. Mary Robinette has so many different projects that she's worked on. So you can find stuff in the links, and you can find them on Twitter, Instagram, and elsewhere on the internets as well.
Also, if you enjoy this, don't forget to check out the Apollo in Real Time website. You still can follow along with them recovering. It's still awesome. It doesn't end yet.
Yeah, they have another like 3 days.
It's still very exciting, actually. As they work through the anomaly and try to recover, it's all still happening. So it's pretty fun. We've been listening, and a lot of us have a little Slack group at work where we're just chatting about what's happening in real time as it's happening on the feed. So
because
they just had the anomaly, right? Yeah.
They're still 2 hours into the anomaly at this point.
Yeah, they're still figuring their shit out.
Pretty cool.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks again for watching. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you on Friday for another SciComm Happy Hour with Kishore and Bobak, and I'm not sure who else. There's going to be some new guests this week, so love you guys. Shelter safe. Keep your hands clean.